Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 941, Wedding Candle. The old man couldn't help but rub his forehead, trying to figure out just what happened to Margaret. His wife was the supreme master of the purple power world and countless warriors would kill to become her disciples. Margaret, however, was different. He was actually the one who tried his best to convince her to cultivate and become his wife's disciple. It took him so long to persuade the young lady and she had finally agreed. He also had wanted to say something to Zen but it wouldn't be appropriate given the context of the situation, so he could only put it aside for now. The celebration lasted for hours with festivities going on well into the night. It was very late when the guests finally departed, leaving the cloud hall in silence once again. Letitia sat stiffly on the bed, the sheets underneath made of exquisite golden silk and brown cocoon fiber. It felt like soft, buttery clouds underneath her touch. In this world, an ordinary girl was normally married at the age of 14 or 15. Letitia was by no means old, but it was true that she had married a bit late compared to other mortal girls. She was also a virgin, which naturally made her nervous and also a bit frightened. The discomfort made her chatty, constantly finding random stuff to talk about with her new husband. "Who was that old man we met today?" she asked in a hushed voice. Zen shook his head and smiled. "I'm not sure." The old man had made no effort to reveal his identity, but he stayed in Cloud Hall for the meantime. Zen roughly guessed that he was someone powerful, maybe even a master sent by the celestial position. Or perhaps he was from the human race. After all, he knew Derek would have surely reported his information to the upper world. Letitia's bright eyes widened. "You're not sure who he is? Then why did you take his pill?" Her expression was stern but the playfulness in her tone made her look adorable. Her face tugged on Zen's heartstrings as he sat down next to her. "You also saw him feed it to me so." It was true that he didn't know what that pill was for but his body remained the same. There was no reaction so far so maybe it still hadn't taken effect. Zen would have to wait to find out what effect the pill that old man gave him would have. "Do you feel uncomfortable?" she asked, turning her face to look at him. Zen gently pulled her into his arms. "No," he murmured softly, lifting her chin so that he might have easier access to her lips. Only when Zen was close enough did she realize what he was trying to do. "You," she exclaimed but she did not struggle. The proximity made her heart race but she wasn't sure if it was from hesitation or anticipation. Still, she figured she wouldn't have any reason to struggle tonight so she decided to curl up like an obedient lamb. The dim room was bathed by the light of a single candle, casting a sensual, romantic mood between the two lovers. The golden silk was soft and light between their two bodies and the telltale fragrance of love was heavy in the air. The two had a very wonderful night, but the same could not be said for Margaret. The light of water rippled above her and the dark clouds hid the beams of the waning moon. She was in an awfully bad mood and the melancholic night sky was not helping. "Caw!" the ancestral dragon cried out. It was normally very energetic but it somehow sensed Margaret's unhappiness. It only cawed every now and then but did not dare misbehave. "This place isn't fun," Margaret said, rubbing her shoulders for warmth in the cold night. The ancestral dragon tilted its head at her in curiosity. "Want me to bring you somewhere interesting?" Caw! It did not refuse at all and was very eager with Margaret's proposal. The ancestral dragon might have built an initially close relationship with Zen because of the imprinting but after being taken care of by Margaret, the dragon seemed to have grown closer to the young woman. Margaret stood up. "Let's go then," she said, opening her arms and allowing the ancestral dragon to happily jump in her embrace. A purple haze surrounded Margaret and coiled around her body while her eyes glowed a dim purple. The purple smoke slowly enveloped her until her entire body disappeared and stepped into the purple power world. The old man had told her that once she entered the purple power world, his wife would be sure to find her. She wanted to test that out now for herself. The purple power world, contrary to its name, was not a complete world but a shattered one. However, despite its state, it was still significantly bigger than the Great World. "Caw!" Ka! The ancestral dragon cried out with glee once it entered the purple power world, seemingly pleased with what it saw. It circled around the vast, limitless space and constantly let out its lively caws. The purple power world was big and empty, but Margaret wasn't scared of anything at all. This place gave her a sense of security, as if she belonged here and it belonged to her. She looked around for a bit before sighing. The old man told me that someone would take me in as her disciple. Did he lie to me? She curled her lips, unhappy with the possibility of having been fooled. She was initially averse to cultivating. However, Zen made her think otherwise. She imagined a wonderful future with him where she could stand proudly at his side once he rose to the top of the universe. It would be her greatest happiness if she managed to help him reach his goals and fulfill his destiny. The urge to cultivate as soon as possible was driven by her excessive need to stay by his side. By then, I'll be 1,000 times stronger than you, she thought in confidence as she imagined Letitia in a red dress, facing her as an enemy. Cultivate. I want to cultivate too. Even if my master doesn't appear, I will still cultivate, she thought in determination. A firm and resolute expression appeared in her eyes, signifying her strong commitment to walk the path of a warrior for love. Whoosh! With a light wave of her hand, a gigantic sword descended from the sky. A sword. Whoosh! 2 swords. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless gigantic swords were summoned and descended upon the purple power world. These 999 swords were densely packed in the sky, arranged by a certain order. These swords would normally disappear and return to their original positions after slashing down. However, Margaret was currently in the purple power world and her summoned swords did not return to their original positions. These swords were controlled by warriors from different sky regions of the purple power world. In the southern sky region, a large ship decked in precious jewels glided in the sky. At the bow of the ship stood a woman, seemingly around 30 years old and still charming with her fair, exquisite face. Her purple robe floated elegantly around her figure as the wind whooshed past the ship. However, this serene image was quickly interrupted by the sight of huge swords dropping rapidly from the sky. The woman frowned. What's going on? The gigantic swords of the purple power world had the ability to penetrate space and arrive at their destination in an instant. This could be considered as a type of law of causality, so that no matter where a warrior was, in this world or another, they could make use of these swords so long as they had the purple power body. Chapter 942, Sword River. The fact that the swords weren't returned immediately after being borrowed was a nuisance. Instead, they had been pulled down from the southern sky region, attracting the attention of the purple-robed woman. Could it be that someone is practicing the colorful sword array? She thought curiously. The colorful sword array was a kind of sword array in the purple power world. For a cultivator to practice it, 11,000 colossal swords had to be used. But what happened soon after made her disregard the assumption completely. The number of gigantic swords that were pulled out of the deep sky before her increased. At first, only 1 or 2 swords fell. In the next moment, the number grew to dozens, then hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. There had to be over 100,000 swords coming down. The number of great swords left in the sky of the southern sky region was dwindling. So many are coming down. Is the person taking them as some kind of food? The woman's expression shifted entirely. Although there was a great number of swords in the purple power world, there were also quite a lot of martial artists that possessed the purple power body. Countless great swords would be borrowed out every day. But usually after these swords fell and fulfilled the task, they would be returned immediately. It was a rather normal thing to witness the swords constantly flying away and coming back. Very few people would ever attempt to summon all 99.9 billion great swords in one go. Such a person who could do that would need to at least possess the first-rank purple power body, which was the black-purple body. But warriors at such a level were already powerful in themselves and normally didn't need to use the swords. Although the weapons were powerful enough to destroy a great world, they weren't much of a threat to the most powerful masters. In dealing with the masters, these swords only served as an intimidation tactic. In the instance of 2 masters fighting against each other, if one of them had the ability to summon numerous swords, then the warrior could wipe out all the disciples and supporters on the other side. Still, it was a rare occurrence. A year ago, the giant swords in the southern sky region had once been summoned away on a large scale. Although it wasn't clear who had done it, the astonishing number of swords being summoned away was enough to attract the attention of the powerful masters of the purple power world. Only when a high-rank purple power body appeared could it be possible. At the very least, a third-rank blue-purple body or a second-rank exact purple body warrior would be able to achieve it. Meanwhile, many people were sent to search through the purple power world, hoping to find which purple power body was responsible. But the search was fruitless and the powerful masters were left puzzled and at a loss. After a purple power body had woken up, it instinctively had a sense of belonging to the purple power world. Clearly, the woman whose purple power body just woke up didn't stay in the purple power world for long. It was an unusual thing as the person left no clues as to who she really was. In the end, they left the matters unsettled. If the woman didn't appear on her own accord, it was impossible for them to find her via space nodes. Is this the woman who summoned the swords a year ago? The purple-robed woman suspected. Generally, the warriors of the purple power world were well aware of the rules. Unless one borrowed the great swords to practice the sword array, one wouldn't pull the swords down for no reason. It would take an extremely high-ranking martial artist to effortlessly control the swords. But this woman controlling the swords was going beyond anyone's imagination. She wasn't following the usual rules. Naturally, the purple-robed woman associated it with the matter from a year ago when flocks of swords went away and came back. As she pondered, she gently stomped her feet, making the ship turn around and take a dive. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The swords were still raining down. Some were about to run into her ship, so she had no choice but to avert the ship and avoid a hit. Oh, this hateful woman. As she dodged the swords, she grew more and more agitated. Even if the person summoning the swords didn't know about the rules, she should at least have had some common sense. What was she doing by pulling all the swords down there? Was she going to eat them all? They weren't food. After everything, she would have to return the hundreds of thousands of swords back to where they came from. That was no easy task. Following the swords' trajectory, the ship dove at an increasing speed. Soon after, the woman on the bow of the ship saw something that left her shocked and wide-eyed. Millions of gigantic swords were gathered below. It became clear that the woman in white hadn't only pulled down swords from the southern sky region, but also a great number from the northern, western, and eastern sky regions. Millions of weapons spiraled in the air, making more evident the river of swords. In spite of everything, it was a spectacular sight. This, summoning the swords from other planes was a simple process. Once a cultivator summoned them, they would simply slash down by inertia before disappearing. The purple power body owner didn't need to operate anything after the summoning. But these huge swords formed a river, each of them moving under someone's precise control. When every weapon reached the end of the flow, they would turn around, merging into the river like a nimble fish. On top of that, a terrifying fact was how they did not make even a hint of noise as they surged. What did that mean? While controlling the millions of weapons, the person hadn't caused any two swords to clash together even once. The scene before the purple-robed woman was all too strange and shocking. She wondered how strong a power could be that it could control this volume of weapons to such a degree. Rolling up her sleeves, Margaret revealed her fair-skinned wrists. As she waved up toward the sky, her slender fingers trembled. At that point, she had yet to understand how she should practice her skills. On the one hand, she controlled the swords by mere instinct, but on the other hand, she was feeling rather bored. With a faint smile, she spoke to the ancestral dragon. How was the show, little dragon? Caw, caw. The dragon gave a long look at the river of swords flowing through the sky and suddenly shook its tail. With that response, Margaret smiled. Then I'll show you more. Suddenly, she stopped waving her hands and raised 10 fingers upright. Hoo hoo hoo. All the swords stood upright in unison at her gesture. Turn, swoosh. The several million swords formed a circular vortex in a slow rotation. Back on the ship, the scene left the purple-robed woman speechless. The colorful sword array was an extremely powerful sword array among all in the universe. A beginner who had just begun to learn the skill had to learn to control 1100 gigantic swords. Once someone completely mastered the skill, one could control 110,000 great swords with ease. The swords, of course, were not of top grade. If warriors in the Spirit Supreme realm happened to be rich enough, they could forge 110,000 low-grade sacred weapons to be used in the sword array. But many masters in the purple power world could control 1.1 million great swords simultaneously, all of which were top-grade sacred weapons. As for the supermasters, they were able to control as many as 11 million great swords. In the eyes of these supermasters, however, the divine weapons weren't of much value. But because they couldn't find 11 million divine weapons, they could only mix in a few divine weapons in the array. At that moment, the one performing the stunt could control millions of gigantic swords with ease. What was even more unbelievable was how the sword array changed according to a certain pattern. Through continuous practice, one could control the sword array more accurately. The weapons didn't form the shape of a massive sword but instead formed varying figures. Whoosh! The purple-robed woman adjusted the angle of the ship and passed right by the densely packed bunch of swords. A woman in white stood below her, wearing a big smile. She controlled the swords with astonishing facility. Indeed, she's merely playing with them. The sight was rather disturbing to the purple-robed woman. She's a young girl at the internal elixir realm. How could she be doing this? Jealousy surged within her. Usually, it was easy for women to fall victim to envy when faced with someone stronger than themselves. An internal elixir realm martial artist was considered as weak as a newborn baby as far as the upper world was concerned. Strictly speaking, a warrior at such level couldn't even be considered to have passed the threshold of martial arts. Nonetheless, the girl before her was freely controlling all the swords as she pleased. It was too unfair, she thought. Chapter 943, The Purple Jade Building. The woman in the purple robe was jealous, but she didn't let it mess with her mind. She thought that Margaret's ability of controlling the swords was amazing. Moreover, since Margaret could use millions of giant swords at will, her purple power body must surely be at a high grade. As she thought this, the woman in the purple robe controlled the large ship and descended slowly. Margaret was enjoying playing with the swords. As her eyes flashed, she pulled them out one by one from the slowly spinning whirlpool. They came together to form words in the air. In the cold, long night, only loneliness comes to me when I think of you. As Margaret gazed at the sentence in the sky, her eyes turned wistful. She might look happy as she played, but she still couldn't drive away the loneliness in her heart. The woman in purple had already left the large ship. As she looked up at the words, a sneer took place on her face. Such a pathetic woman, she muttered acidly. She fumed inwardly for a while as she thought, and then said to Margaret, with your talent, you can choose any outstanding man in the entire universe once you achieve your cultivation. Why do you have to be so miserable? Margaret had been too focused to notice the large ship and the woman in purple. But at the woman's words, she turned and took a long look at her before saying, no matter how outstanding the other men are, they won't ever match up to him. Other men are inferior to him. I don't believe that, the woman in purple said disdainfully. According to her, Margaret only had a cultivation base that was at the internal elixir realm, and she didn't know anything about the purple power world. She must have been born in some lower world, and she was of the opinion that warriors of the lower world were not very remarkable. Moreover, Margaret was just an internal elixir realm warrior, which meant that the man she was longing for might not have a high-level cultivation base, probably at the virtual tribulation realm. But if he was really so outstanding, he might, at most, be a life-and-death realm warrior. And according to the woman in the purple robe, such a warrior was a mere nobody. The female warriors of the lower world always had limited horizons and didn't know that there were far too many outstanding men in the universe. Margaret did not want to talk about this and was a little incensed with the woman in purple, but she asked suddenly, are you my master? She had learned from the old man that as long as she entered the purple power world, master would naturally come looking for her. Since the woman in purple had appeared alone, Margaret's mind had immediately jumped to the thought that perhaps this woman was her master. The woman in purple was taken aback at Margaret's words. She was at the Spirit Supreme realm, which meant that she was definitely competent enough to be the master of an internal elixir realm warrior. The woman in the purple robe had already figured out that Margaret was not an ordinary warrior. If she really took Margaret as her disciple, her own master would probably chase her out of the purple power world. But if she informed her master about Margaret, her master would probably be overjoyed. This thought brought the bitter taste of jealousy to the woman's heart. But she rearranged her features and a courteous smile surfaced on her face as she said, you want to find a master here? Margaret replied, yes, she wanted to cultivate, but she really didn't know how. She had learned a few cultivation methods of the ethereal spirit sect back at the She clan, but they were incompatible with the purple power body and couldn't be used at all. She would be more than willing to cultivate if she had a master. The thought that she would be able to help Zen in the future and even give him a big surprise brought her a sense of satisfaction. The woman in purple smiled. You're qualified to have a good master. Just wait a moment, your master will be here very soon. The woman in purple believed that recommending Margaret to her own master would be a great deed, a chance that she would grab with both hands. But she was not the only warrior present in the purple power world. Margaret had suddenly pulled out millions of gigantic swords, which would probably also shock other warriors in the purple power world. The woman in purple intended to introduce Margaret to her master before anyone else got a chance to meet Margaret. So the woman in purple quickly took out a message rune and burned it. The rune she was using was naturally much stronger than the ones from the lower world. It could even send voice messages across this supreme world. Margaret took the woman at her word when she said that the master would be arriving soon. Margaret was pretty weak in aspects other than her EQ. Or rather, she couldn't be bothered to think too much about other things. So she picked up the ancestral dragon and continued to control the millions of giant swords. This time, the words she spelled out in the air were, "Staying in the pale moonlight, I miss you very much." As she waited for her master to arrive, the woman in purple looked at the words in the air. The melancholic words rendered her speechless, but also surprised her and made her a little curious as to why Margaret missed a man so much. She then spoke, "My master is a supreme expert of the purple power world. If you are lucky enough to become her disciple, you have to cultivate wholeheartedly. As for the man you love, don't even think about him anymore." To the woman's surprise, Margaret suddenly turned and blinked, a smile gracing her face. "If you don't allow me to think of him, I'd rather not cultivate." The woman in purple frowned, and then said, "If you become my master's disciple, I will be your senior. You should remember what I tell you today. My master is an outstanding warrior, and there are very few warriors in the universe who are qualified enough to become her disciples. You have to seize this opportunity, and once you grow stronger, you have the chance to select any young and excellent man you like. But right now, you should focus on your cultivation instead of thinking of the man you like." "I choose to cultivate just because of him," Margaret said. "If you're telling me not to think about him, then I will not cultivate. Do you understand?" Oh, the woman in purple was stunned at Margaret's words, wondering about the logic behind them. How could she cultivate just for a man? She thought about it for a few seconds and said, "Cultivating martial arts will strengthen your mind so you can break through your mental barrier and reach the top level of cultivation. You should cultivate for your own sake, think about yourself. How can you cultivate for someone else? But what's so inappropriate about my wanting to cultivate for someone else?" Margaret asked, tilting her head. The woman in purple was now in shock. She thought she should let her master persuade and teach Margaret. There was no need for her to meddle in this matter. In her eyes, it was hard to communicate with a woman like Margaret. Minutes later, beams of purple light gathered and someone slowly appeared on the large ship. The woman in purple turned to watch, respect replacing the shock on her features. She knelt to the ground and greeted, "Master." The person on the ship was dressed in a light purple robe. She was a beautiful woman, seemingly about 40 years of age. The moment she had appeared, her eyes found Margaret and then shifted to the giant swords floating in the air. She had just learned from her disciple about the woman with a high-rank purple power body that her disciple had discovered. Her body might be at least a third-rank blue-purple body. At this news, she had hurriedly rushed over from the purple jade building. The number of the purple power bodies in the universe was huge. But most of them were light purple or cyan purple. The light purple body and the cyan purple body were at the 6th rank and the 5th rank respectively. The number of 4th rank purple power body was extremely small. And if a woman had a 4th rank purple power body, she had the qualifications to unconditionally join the purple jade building. So when her disciple had told her that there was a woman with the blue-purple body, she was eager to meet her. She believed that Margaret might have the 3rd rank purple power body. But she was left shocked when she saw Margaret. It wasn't a 3rd rank or a 2nd rank purple power body that Margaret had. It was much higher. She had the 1st rank black-purple body. How had a 1st rank purple power body appeared? It was next to impossible. The beautiful woman was momentarily confused. "Master," the woman in purple uttered softly, kneeling before her master. Realizing that she had lost her composure, the beautiful woman said to the woman in purple, "Bridget, please stand up." She then walked over to Margaret as Bridget went up to take the beautiful woman's arm. As they came to stop before Margaret, she asked her, "What is your name?" Realizing that the beautiful woman was her master, Margaret bowed and replied, "My surname is She, and my first name is Margaret." "Margaret She?" the beautiful woman asked. Margaret nodded. The beautiful woman then said, "I'm the leader of the Purple Jade Building. If you take me as your master, then you'll have to join the Purple Jade Building." Chapter 944, The Soul Enchanting Building. The Purple Jade Building was extremely famous in the universe, but Margaret didn't know about it and also could not totally understand what the beautiful woman said. Although she had to join the Purple Jade Building if she wanted to become the beautiful woman's disciple, Margaret didn't mind it at all. With a smile on her face, she said to the beautiful woman, "Okay. No problem." At this moment, the beautiful woman raised her head to take a look. Those large words that were formed by the giant swords seemed to form a poem which showed how much Margaret missed a man. Thus, the beautiful woman frowned and said, "The cultivation method of the Purple Jade Building emphasizes pure heart and few desires. If you still have any ties with the mortal world, you must get rid of them one by one. Don't even think about anything else while cultivating here. What? Margaret blinked. It was different from what the old man had told her, but she still shook her head resolutely. That's impossible. If so, I will not join the Purple Jade Building or acknowledge you as my master. The beautiful woman also did not expect that Margaret would change so quickly. But Margaret had the first-rank purple power body, so the beautiful woman would not give up persuading Margaret to be her disciple. She coldly laughed. You are still young and immature, so I won't allow you to do any reckless thing as you wish. Margaret didn't care how powerful the beautiful woman was, and she insisted on saying, I will not join the Purple Jade Building. Don't force me to do that. When the woman called Bridget saw that her master pulled a long face, she quickly persuaded, Margaret, my master's suggestion is also for your own good. I think you had better. Margaret got even more morose. She just wanted to be the beautiful woman's disciple, but she didn't know that there was such an annoying rule. At this moment, she did not say anything and was going to leave. But just as she was about to turn around, she felt as if her body was stuck in quicksand, she couldn't move even a single step. However, the ancestral dragon was not affected in the slightest. It leapt onto Margaret's shoulder and roared at the beautiful woman. This little dragon isn't affected at all. The beautiful woman exclaimed. The beautiful woman revealed a trace of surprise on her face. In truth, this ancestral dragon was able to break free from the shackles of most of original laws. Even the high-grade space law and time law had no effect on it. Let me go. Margaret wanted to leave here and return to the great world she had lived in. When she was unable to move, she suddenly waved her hand and all the giant swords in the sky smashed down. Meanwhile, the beautiful woman smiled faintly and waved her hand, which caused the gigantic swords to break free from Margaret's control and return to their original positions. You're only at the internal elixir realm, yet you can control millions of giant swords. This talent is indeed worthy of praise, but to think that you can injure me with them is too much. Don't be so silly. Since you're so young, and a bit stubborn, I won't blame you for this. You should just obediently follow me to the Purple Jade Building. I will treat you well. Once you make great achievement in your cultivation, I will definitely help you choose the most outstanding talent in the universe. You are not my master yet, so you don't have the right to pick any talent for me, Margaret coldly shot back. However, the beautiful woman didn't get furious. Her lips were still even curved into a smile. Bridget, who stood at one side, was also stunned. She knew that her master had a bad temper, but even if Margaret scolded her just now, she didn't get mad. Thus, she guessed that her master really thought much of Margaret. It was a pity that Margaret still didn't appreciate that and kept on refusing the beautiful woman's invitation. In the end, she would just ask for trouble. Bridget mentally sighed at the thought of this. If you don't want to go to the Purple Jade Building, I'll go kill that man and stop you from thinking of him. Do you think that is a good way? The beautiful woman said in return after walking in front of Margaret. What? When Margaret heard her words, she quickly became anxious. She didn't know the beautiful woman's cultivation level and strength, but she guessed that she surely must be as powerful as that old man. Even Zen didn't have the strength to fight against him. Margaret was worried and didn't know what to do if the beautiful woman really intended to kill Zen. When the beautiful woman saw Margaret's panic-stricken face, she smiled gently. Don't worry. If you join the Purple Jade Building and focus on your cultivation, you will soon forget about that man. After all, falling in love with someone is just of no use to a warrior. However, Margaret's panicked expression only lasted for a moment before she coldly retorted, don't even think about it. If you dare kill Zen, I'll immediately commit suicide. I won't acknowledge you as my master even if I die. Zen. The beautiful woman pondered over this name, and compared it to the names of hundreds of young, outstanding warriors in the universe who left the deepest impressions on her. She thought that Zen wasn't one of those outstanding warriors. Since he was a nobody, then there was nothing to be afraid of. The beautiful woman had her doubts before. If the man that Margaret admired was the successor of a supreme lord, then it would be troublesome if she killed him. When Margaret realized that she had blurted out Zen's name, she quickly covered her mouth, and regretted it. However, the beautiful woman did not expect that Zen, who was relatively unknown now, would become quite remarkable in the future. His name would be the one that she would never forget for the rest of her life. Ha ha! At that moment, a wave of laughter suddenly rang out in the sky. The voice sounded gentle and pleasant, but it was extremely enchanting. People's faces flushed and their hearts raced upon hearing the tantalizing laughter. While the beautiful woman still remained calm, Bridget began feeling uncomfortable. As for Margaret, she was affected since her cultivation base was at the lowest level. Her face flushed and her breathing quickened when the enchanting voice entered her ears. She was Zen's woman and she wasn't a virgin anymore, so such an enchanting voice caused her body to respond unnaturally to it. The Purple Jade Building is a building full of nuns, and those who enter there are widows. You would be very bored if you become a disciple of this woman, the voice floated over gently. It felt like someone blew cool air in Margaret's ear, which made all the hairs on her body to stand on their ends, and caused her to tremble uncontrollably. Not long after, a large golden bed appeared in the sky. The bed was around 100 feet wide and over 100 feet long, but surprisingly, a delicate woman lay on it and was not a giant. The pretty woman was pure as a white lotus. However, her minimal clothes barely covered her svelte and curvaceous figure. Ordinary men would surely find her attractive, and even Margaret thought that the woman was extremely charming. But what flabbergasted Margaret the most was that 10 men, who were naked from the torso up, sat on the edge of the bed. All of them looked vigorous and powerful. Right now, all of them sat cross-legged with their eyes closed. Leah, you impudent and immoral woman. You don't have the right to scold me. The beautiful woman was livid when she saw the pretty woman on the bed appear. The barely clothed woman named Leah Zhao lifted her body up and coiled her legs like 2 thin snakes. She then placed an arm on the shoulder of one of the strong men. A charming smile lit up her face as she looked up at the poem in the sky. Little girl, I see that you are not a virgin anymore. And you made such a gloomy poem in the sky with the giant swords because you miss a man very much, right? You should consider joining the soul enchanting building. Not only can you play with all kinds of men, but you can learn about the secret female-male dual cultivation methods. Jerk, the beautiful woman hissed before Leah Zhao finished speaking. Leah Zhao didn't get angry even after being insulted. She simply smiled and said, there is more than one way to cultivate martial arts. Krista, we've already argued many times, but you haven't convinced me even once. Margaret stood in her spot and hugged the ancestral dragon. Her mind was a mess and she felt very confused, as she had no idea who were these people she encountered. She didn't know that there were 3 buildings in the Purple Power world, and that they were well known throughout the universe. The beautiful woman, Krista Hua, was the leader of the Purple Jade Building, while Leah Zhao was the leader of the Soul Enchanting Building. However, these 2 buildings differed greatly from each other. The Purple Jade Building was a typical nunnery, so those who wished to enter it must have little to no desire and stop thinking about anyone or anything in their lives. As the name suggested, the Soul Enchanting Building was indeed a tempting place for many male warriors. Plenty of bold and promiscuous girls lived there, but not many warriors dared to enter such a place. Chapter 945, Elder Appearan. Yes, sex was nice but it wasn't incentive enough for men to enter the Soul Enchanting Building where few souls dared to tread. Why? Because no matter how much pleasure one experienced in life, it would all be for nothing if he ended up dying from too much. The women in the Soul Enchanting Building had no need to force anything on anyone. Their top-tier flirtation skills were enough to make any man never want to leave. Once caught under their spell, the men would indulge themselves in the sins of the flesh non-stop, until their bodies were drained and their life vitality greatly depleted. All their 100 or even 1,000 years of hard work and cultivation would all be taken away. The danger of damaging one's core power was high and the worst that could happen was death. There was no way Margaret would join such a place. It was true that she wanted a man but that man was Zen and Zen alone. The Purple Jade Building, on the other hand, was a place where love was forbidden which she would also never accept. I was tricked by that wicked old man. She brooded resentfully. What should she do now? She was already here. How would she be able to escape with these 2 people in front of her? She briefly wondered if she could use the space node to escape and go back to the central region. However, what if she brought trouble to Zen? This was truly a tight spot she found herself in. Meanwhile, as these questions rushed through her mind, Leah and Krista began arguing. The 2 bickered persistently, opposing each other as both were unwilling to give way. Margaret had a first-rank purple power body, a very valuable asset for whoever got her as a disciple, so neither of them were willing to lose. Just as their arguing turned into screaming, an old and dignified voice called out, "Will the 2 of you go away?" Both Leah and Krista froze, their argument forgotten as an old woman walked into the scene. The woman wore a solemn expression on her face and held a cane in her hand. Despite having shouted at each other wildly just moments before, both Leah and Krista immediately composed themselves and extended a respectful greeting to the old woman, Elder Appearan. The Purple Power world had 3 renowned buildings and a famous tower. One was the Purple Jade Building, the second was the Soul Enchanting Building, and the third was the Moon Building. But the one that held the absolute power over all of them was the Appearan Tower. The old woman in front of them was none other than the tower's owner, Elder Appearan. The old woman hobbled slowly towards Margaret with the help of her cane. Good, very good, that old fellow has found a good disciple for me. Krista's eyes immediately widened at the old master's words. Elder Apiran, I was the one who found her first, she whined. There was no way she was giving up someone as special as Margaret. Leah chuckled beside her. So what if you found her first? She obviously doesn't want to join your purple jade building to become a nun. Elder Apiran snorted. You were the first. She gave Krista a cold glare before turning to Margaret and smiling warmly at her. Little girl, give me your right hand. Margaret was completely lost. There was no way she was going to be rash in calling anyone her master. Nevertheless, she extended her right hand timidly towards the old lady. On her palm was a special locating rune that belonged to the celestial position. Leah and Krista finally understood why Elder Apiran had claimed Margaret as her disciple. Even if she herself was not a member of the celestial position, her husband was an important member of the race. Elder Apiran looked at Krista and asked, do you see it? Do you still need me to explain? Krista shook her head in embarrassment. No need, Elder Apiran. I didn't know you have already claimed her before us. Never mind, Elder Apiran huffed, before turning to Margaret with a smile. Little girl, my old man asked you to learn from a master, and that master is me. Margaret pursed her lips. The earlier ruckus with Leah and Krista had made her lose hope of ever finding a master, but the sudden appearance of this old lady revived the determination in her veins. It was only through the help of a master would she be able to improve her cultivation and stand proudly by Zen's side. She continued to ask with a vigilant look, you can I think about my man if I take you as my master? The question baffled Elder Apiran, not really getting what Margaret meant at first. Leah, who had been standing in the sidelines, burst into laughter. Ha ha, this beautiful girl looks virtuous, but I bet she has some traits that she could develop better in our soul enchanting building. It seems our place is more suitable for you. Margaret's face flushed beet red. No, no, no. I didn't mean that. The argument between Leah and Krista earlier had muddled her head and now she didn't know what she was saying. She couldn't believe she asked such a thing to a potential master. It was a good thing that Elder Apiran seemed to have understood her heart. She chuckled lightly and patted Margaret's hand. My old man has already told me all about you. I know that you originally had no interest in further advancing your cultivation, but now you want to practice martial arts for that man. There won't be many restrictions if you become my disciple. However, advancing will be heavily dependent on your belief and determination. Your perseverance will be rewarded if you can bear through the end for that person. Margaret was greatly relieved at what she heard. If it was for him, then she would never lose sight of her goal. She nodded enthusiastically. I can. Elder Apiran smiled. Very good. Since that's the case, follow me into the tower. Now, can I wait? She had come here to find a master, but she did not want to immediately enter the Apiran tower. Zen had just recently returned to the central region and she wanted to spend more time with him. Elder Apiran nodded her head. Of course, you can come whenever you want. However, you have to follow me to the Apiran tower right now so that when you come back, you can directly enter the space node and arrive at the tower's entrance. The first time a purple power body warrior entered the purple power world, the space node through which the warrior entered was entirely random but could be easily changed so that the next time she came in, she could enter from the point where she left. Elder Apiran wanted to change her space node to the place near the Apiran tower. Okay, she immediately agreed. A self-satisfied smile made its way on her face. Elder Apiran seemed like a kind and amiable person, so Margaret felt that she could have much leeway once she became her disciple. The couple back in their chamber had spent a romantic night. Letitia stretched her well-proportioned body lazily and lay on Zen's side, staring at his peaceful sleeping face. Their night had been eventful. The two of them had spent the entire night tangled together in the throes of passion and neither of them had gotten a wink of rest. She shuffled towards Zen's chest, curling her body towards him. Are you asleep? Her small frame molded perfectly with his and she felt as if she was lying down on a large, wooden boat in the middle of a peaceful ocean. Realizing that Zen was only pretending to sleep, she mischievously raised her hand to pinch his nose. Just before she could reach it, Zen immediately grabbed her hand at lightning speed. Letitia pouted cutely. You're so annoying. Let go of me. But how could Zen let her go? He smiled and pulled her closer to his tight embrace. HMPH, last night she started to protest once again. Zen laughed, interrupting her before she could finish her words. Don't mention that. You almost froze me. You deserved it. You were so naughty. Be like that again and I'll freeze you to death. She teased. I'm not afraid of being frozen. If you don't believe me, maybe we should do it again, he laughed suggestively. No way. Do you think I'm an idiot? The morning was filled with soft touches and cheerful laughter. This went on for a while until they had to get up and bathe. Letitia put her hair up in a bun, revealing her small and tender earlobes. After marriage, it was customary for the bride in the central region to tie her hair up in a bun for 3 days after the wedding day. The hairstyle changed her usual cheerful and playful look into that of a dignified young woman. Zen, on the other hand, made his way straight for the old man's place. The mysterious old man still hadn't left Cloud Hall and Zen had yet to figure out what he came here for. The Cloud Hall had arranged a tea house for the old man to rest in. Zen found him drinking tea leisurely once he arrived. Zen respectfully bowed before him just after entering. The old man chuckled as he saw another figure fly over from outside the tea house. It seemed that Margaret had also returned. Zen found it weird to see Margaret look so worn out as if she had just returned from a terribly long journey. Did she leave Cloud Hall yesterday? Where could she have gone to? He remembered the old man talking to Margaret yesterday and now she rushed over here so early in the morning. Did something happen between the two? Zen wondered curiously. Chapter 946, 4 years. Margaret walked in, or rather, flew into the room with a faint smile on her face. She asked the old man in a sweet tone, "Sir, may I offer you a cup of tea?" The old man chuckled at the softness of her tone and nodded in agreement. The kind and considerate Elder Apiran was the wife of this old man, and she had just become Elder Apiran's disciple the previous night, so it was only right that she now treated the old man in front of her with great respect. However, she was currently unwilling to let Zen find out that she was trying to improve herself in cultivation. Smiling upon the consent she had received, Margaret sifted a pot of green tea before brewing a cup and handing it over to the old man, who accepted with an ecstatic expression on his face. He was very happy to have found this girl. Laughing loudly, he showed his happiness. "That's a good girl. No one among my disciples is so courteous like you." He was sure that his wife must be very grateful to him for introducing such a talented disciple to her. And now, upon discovering what a sweet and good-mannered girl she was, he felt even more pleased with his discovery. However, since he was able to read her mind, he also understood the bitterness she had borne in mind at the wedding ceremony the day before. It was his pity for the lovesick girl that had made him praise her to the skies in front of Zen, whether the effort bore fruit or not. Margaret smiled with gratitude as she prepared another cup of tea. She handed it over steadily to Zen and then retreated to one side, giving the two men some room to talk. After Zen had taken a small sip of his tea, he turned to the old man and began to thank him. "I am really grateful for the gift you gave me yesterday." But before Zen could finish his sentence, the old man waved the gratitude off and directly continued with his own agenda. "Max and the others have returned to the celestial position race. The pill that I gave you is nothing impressive. It will merely help you cultivate a little faster. As for that man who was sent there by the Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment, I have already asked him to leave. I don't have a name, so you don't need to ask me about it." Clearly, he was the sort of person who was least bothered about polite and traditional conversation starters. Zen's mouth was still wide open for having been interrupted. Furthermore, before he could ask a single question, the old man had already told him everything he wanted to know. In fact, it was his straightforward way of speaking which had rendered Zen speechless. The old man chuckled and drained the cup of tea in his hand in one gulp. He then turned his head towards Margaret and asked, "Little girl, please pour me another cup of tea." Margaret walked up to him and filled the porcelain teacup before retreating to the side once again. Even after that, Zen didn't have an opportunity to speak as the old man continued himself. "Since you don't have a destined fate, our celestial position race won't be able to control your future. Therefore, I am not going to bring you back to the race." Really? Zen was surprised. The old man chuckled. "Do you feel disgruntled about that? In any case, it has been already determined. Although some old men almost fought with me over this matter, I was right after all. You are free to ascend on your own. Our race will not interfere with your path or your journey in this world and beyond." Zen was even more confused now. He thought for a moment and decided to ask about the Tower of Crystal. Max and the others had discussed the matter with him and decided that the Tower of Crystal should remain in the Sea God continent for at least 3 more centuries. Once more, before he could even utter a single word of the question, the old man answered it. "We'll just leave the Tower of Crystal here for now. It's not going to be of much use for us, anyway." Zen was flabbergasted. He had never seen anyone forestalling their partner in a conversation like this before. Even before the questions were uttered, this old man would answer them all. Zen had to remain silent the entire length of their discussion. On the other hand, Margaret was quite amused and started to snigger in the corner. She had never seen Zen so embarrassed before. Zen then began to think about the reason why the old man wasn't going to bring him to the race, but just as he moved his lips, he immediately shut them again. He was sure that the old man wouldn't let him ask it anyway. As he expected, the old man piped up, "There's no reason for that at all. I've thought about it a lot. Anyone without a destined fate has to choose his or her own path. You possess the talent and the strength to lead the world of chaos, and yet, you are not destined for it. You will have to make a decision on your own. Nobody should interfere with your fortune or your future." Zen took another sip of his tea in silence. Yolanda had said similar words to him just some time ago. She was ready to fight the celestial position race for keeping Klein on her side. Klein was the one who had received the Silver Asura title. However, she had said that she wouldn't interfere a single bit with Zen's matters. In fact, even after he had obtained the heavenly fragment in the past, she hadn't had any reactions and had just let Zen make the decision by himself. Zen was indeed completely free to choose his path. But one little doubt was still nagging him. He felt that he still needed someone to point him in the right direction. He was conflicted. This time also, Zen had no intention of speaking out loud, but the old man still patted him on the shoulder and comforted him. Nobody can repeat the paths of those who have become legends, nor could they ever predict the path for those who will. No one has the right to point the way for you. Not even a supreme lord. But you should remember one thing. Even if I don't bring you to the celestial position race, and even if your blood is not changed, you are already a member of our race. I believe you will remember the promise you have made in the Tower of Crystal. With that, the old man stood up from his seat and waved the porcelain teacup in his hands as he asked Margaret, "May I have another cup of tea?" Margaret smiled and walked over to fill his cup. After the old man drank his third cup in one gulp too, he looked at the ancestral dragon roaming around near Margaret's feet and said, "Oh, I almost forgot, we have also decided to leave the ancestral dragon here with you. Okay, I must go now. See you next time." But Zen simply kept quiet in response. He was sure the old man would interrupt him again if he spoke. Therefore, it wasn't he who responded to the old man's goodbye, but Margaret. She smiled softly and asked, "Sir, what is your name? Would you mind telling it to me?" The old man tilted his head and smiled at her. His mouth moved slightly and a slight, invisible wave of life vitality spread out towards Margaret. After that, his figure flashed and suddenly disappeared from their sight. Nameless. The old man's name is nameless. No wonder he told Zen that he doesn't have a name, Margaret thought to herself. The old man had finally told her his name through his life vitality. As for Margaret's teacher, she already knew that she was called Apiran. Nameless, and Apiran. The couple were quite famous warriors in the entire universe, even though very few people had ever actually met them. Zen looked at her with curiosity and asked, "Margaret, what is the name of this old man?" Margaret's lips pursed as she snorted, "I am not going to tell you." "No, you must let me know it. I am dying with curiosity." Zen was disgruntled. This girl was starting to keep secrets from him. How could he allow her to do that? "No, I won't," Margaret giggled. Her eyes were full of a desire that she tried to hide, but her body was slowly retreating backwards, towards the wall. Zen of course wasn't going to let her go easily. He approached her in a single stride and pulled her into his arms. Since she was unwilling to tell him the truth, he wouldn't let her go before she surrendered. After a while, they almost forgot about the name, as a wave of life vitality spread out from Zen's body and wrapped itself around the tea house. Margaret gently placed the teapot on the table, and her body fell limply into Zen's embrace. Nobody else witnessed the joyful times they then shared with each other. However, despite their glorious and ecstatic moments, Zen still failed to learn anything about the old man's name. And nor could he find out what the old man had said to Margaret or where she had gone last night. Despite his curiosity, he had to give up in the end since Margaret wouldn't let him know no matter how much he begged her. She had started to become a little mysterious in Zen's eyes. He wondered what kind of secrets this once obedient girl had begun to conceal from him. Did it have something to do with that old man from the celestial position race? And Margaret apparently had her reasons for not telling the truth. In fact, given her way, if she could always stay by Zen's side without any efforts, she wouldn't give a penny's worth to martial arts anyway. But now, she understood that the lower world wasn't the place where Zen would stay forever. He would have to ascend to the upper world someday, and she had to follow him. She wanted to give him a surprise. She decided that after he ascended to the upper world, she would enter the purple power world to concentrate on her cultivation, and thus, would be able to meet him in the upper world too. As for Letitia, she might have to cultivate for about 100 years before she could ascend, so Margaret would be the only woman staying by Zen's side at that time. This was the happy future she was looking forward to. In the following days, besides accompanying Letitia and Margaret, Zen spent the rest of his time cultivating. Half a month later, he stepped out of the cloud hall and looked to the east. The eastern region. 4 years had passed like a flash since he had set foot on the cloud road. To most warriors, 4 years were almost negligible compared to their long lives. But Zen had only been 20 years old at that time. 4 years was already a fifth of his past life, and in these 4 years, his life had almost completely turned around. He had been through a lot during this time. It's time to go back now. It's time to go back to the Cloud Sect, he muttered to himself. In the last 4 years, Zen had traveled without even a day's rest on the way. From the moment he left his home, he had never had the time to rest, and even when he was home, he hadn't had an easy time. And now he believed that he needed to pay a visit to the eastern region now that he finally had the time. Chapter 947, Return to the Cloud Sect. As he looked south, a figure appeared in his heart, shocking Zen. The figure belonged to Aura, the eldest princess of the Burning Sky Empire who always took care of and protected him in the past. She was always dressed in green. After Zen had left the eastern region, he had channeled most of his time and energy into rescuing Yan. Aura had been waiting for him in the eastern region, but it was only now that he got the chance to return to her. He thought of Aura who ran about wildly in the palace with him, smashing one wall after another as she looked on, a carefree smile on her face. She didn't have high expectations, always acting like a teacher who had enlightened him about the world. She had always tried her best to do everything the right way and never demanded anything. Zen felt a sudden sense of guilt as he thought of this. Zen's reputation had risen rapidly within the Cloud Hall. After that, he had become very powerful and famous in the central region, his reputation spreading to the eastern region, too. This was enough to ensure Aura's safety. Kenneth wasn't the leader of the Cloud Sect for no reason. He was not a fool. He wouldn't even dare let Aura suffer even the slightest of injuries. Zen wasn't worried about Aura's safety. He had once promised to return to the eastern region, but he hadn't been able to keep his promise for a long time. According to everyone else, 4 years was not a long period of time. They thought Zen to be amazing, having achieved so much in the world and now returning to the eastern region, after having been away for such a short time. Zen had already had several chances to return to the eastern region before. But he had chosen to spend his time cultivating because of Yan. This looked like Zen had left Aura behind, without contacting her during the time he had been away. Zen could choose one of 2 routes to go back to the eastern region. One was to pass through the transmission array and enter the relics of the 6th grade sect, and the other was to directly pass through the central region. In the past, Zen would probably have chosen the shortest route and passed through the transmission array. But Zen wasn't in a hurry right now. It was as if he had a lot of spare time that he could use to relax. He traveled east with Letitia and Margaret, choosing to pass through the entire central region before entering the eastern region. "I've never been to the eastern region," Letitia said with a smile. The 2 women seemed to be happy as they made their way to the east. Zen didn't know if they were still in conflict, but at least now, they weren't being openly hostile to each other. Margaret blinked and smiled. "I've never been there either, but I want to see Zen's hometown where he grew up." The eastern region was merely an extension of the central region. But it was still much larger than the western region and the other regions. This allowed the presence of the powerful Burning Sky Empire in the eastern region. With the high speed at which they were cruising along, it would probably take them only a day to cross over the central region. But the 3 of them moved leisurely and treated this as an outing, their speed slowing down. It took them 7 days before they arrived at the Burning Sky Empire. Zen attracted a lot of attention as he stood at the entrance of the Burning Sky Empire with the 2 beautiful women flanking him. Margaret and Letitia were very attractive, a noble aura framing them and making them look like fairies in a painting. Many people looked at them, admiration tinging their countenances. "That guy looks quite arrogant. He's even brought 2 pretty women into the imperial capital. He would get in trouble if those hoodlums even think of targeting him." "Are you joking? I can't even figure out the cultivation base of those 3. I think they are at least in the illuminating soul realm, and that man is probably an internal elixir realm warrior. Who would dare take action against them? The noble clans. In that case, they'd be asking for trouble if they dare do so." Some commoners and warriors began to quietly discuss among themselves. The 3 of them stood there, impervious to these discussions. In the eastern region, the internal elixir realm was the highest level of a warrior's cultivation base. Kenneth, the leader of the Cloud sect belonging to the Cloud Hall, was the strongest warrior in the entire eastern region. Letitia and Margaret were not interested in the Burning Sky Imperial capital. Letitia controlled the Cloud Hall, which was equivalent to controlling the Cloudy City. And compared to the Cloudy City, which had many clans, the Burning Sky Imperial capital was almost nothing. Margaret had grown up in the Ethereal City, a big city that was famous for its resources and foundation. It had been destroyed by the Heavenly Evil sect, but in the past, even the big cities of the central region had been nothing to the members of the Ethereal City. Zen was on a completely different emotional plane, sighing as he looked upon this place. As Zen and the two women arrived at the entrance of the Cloud sect, there seemed to be some sort of event going on. Several stewards of the Cloud sect stood on the flying chariot, guarding the gate. When one of the stewards saw Zen walk over with Letitia and Margaret, he looked shocked. The steward could not figure out Zen's and Letitia's cultivation levels. But he could recognize that Margaret was at the internal elixir realm. Margaret's fighting strength might not have been as good as some mighty warriors at the ultimate level of the illuminating soul realm if she didn't rely on her purple power body to fight. But as she was an internal elixir realm warrior, she could still intimidate some warriors, especially in the eastern region where the internal elixir realm warriors belonged at the top. The steward approached them on the flying chariot and jumped down from it. He folded his hands at the three of them. "May I know why you've come to the Cloud sect?" Zen looked at the steward and after a moment, laughed. "Steward Cao, don't you remember me?" Steward Cao had guarded the Lake of the Magical Fish in the past. It looked like he had been demoted to the position of a patrolling steward. Steward Cao looked at Zen, confused, but as he recognized him, shock and surprise took their place on his face. He had felt that Zen seemed a little familiar in the beginning, as if he had seen him somewhere else. But Zen had left more than 4 years ago, and in these years, he had turned from a teenager into a strapping young man. His strength had increased by leaps and bounds. He had refined his body several times and his physical body had changed a lot. He also had a different aura now. That was why Steward Cao hadn't recognized him. Surprised recognition lit up his eyes. Zen, even though a lot of information could not be spread to the eastern region from the central region, people could still learn a few tidbits through the Cloud sect. And Zen was a disciple of the Cloud sect in the eastern region. So it was obvious that the Cloud sect would pay attention to his movements. As long as there was a chance, news of Zen's every move would be spread to the eastern region from the central region. As he watched Steward Cao's face bloom in surprise, Zen nodded and raised a finger to his lips, indicating for him to keep silent. Steward Cao nodded and controlled himself from shouting out loudly. When Zen had trained at the Lake of the Magical Fish, Steward Cao had noticed Zen's remarkable performances. He had even tried to report Zen's great performance to the top leaders, but was stopped by several saints. Kenneth had punished those saints, one even killed, in the All Peaks competition. But once that was over, those saints had begun trying to get back at Steward Cao because of the humiliation they had faced. But Steward Cao wasn't the reason behind Kenneth's fury. Those saints had later found a reason and demoted Steward Cao to the position of a patrolling steward. "Why have you been demoted?" Zen asked curiously. Steward Cao was overjoyed, guessing that Zen was in a very high position now. He probably would not be able to get any benefit from Zen, but since Zen had himself asked about it, there might be a chance that Zen could help him be promoted to a higher position. It might be difficult for someone like Steward Cao to achieve something, but Zen might be able to help him get what he wanted just by giving an order. So he briefly told Zen about what had transpired. Zen nodded, but before he could say anything, Letitia frowned and said, "I have never been to the Cloud sect before and had never expected such a boring thing to happen in a second-grade sect. I wonder how Kenneth manages the sect. If I meet him, I'll have to punish him for that." Steward Cao's jaw dropped a little as he heard Letitia refer to the Cloud sect leader by his name. She was blaming the leader. And would she do that to his face? Who was this woman? Steward Cao did not dare ask, but he was secretly trying to guess Letitia's identity. As he saw Steward Cao's expression, Zen smiled. "All right, since the top leader is paying attention to this matter, I believe there should be no problem at all." The top leader. At Zen's words, Steward Cao mustered enough courage to ask, "This fairy-like lady is?" "She's the leader of Cloud Hall," Zen said with a nonchalant shrug. Chapter 948, Aura's Whereabouts. The Cloud sect was a second-grade sect affiliated to the Cloud Hall. But to a majority of the disciples and stewards in the Cloud sect, the Cloud Hall was a legend. There were very few disciples in the Cloud sect who could enter the Cloud Hall. The All Peaks competition was held every 3 years, and only the top 3 from the competition would earn tickets to the Cloud Road. But there were hundreds of thousands of disciples in the Cloud sect, and they had only 1 in 100,000th chance to enter the Cloud Road. Besides, the elites of the Cloud sect would have to compete with the disciples of other 4 second-grade sects. The leader of the Cloud sect could only be considered a steward in the Cloud Hall, at most. He didn't even have the qualifications to become an elder. It could be deduced from this how high and mighty the Cloud Hall was. Zen had no intention of hiding anything, so he told Sao everything about Letitia's identity. But he had overestimated Sao's ability to accept this. Sao's mouth was wide open as he looked at Letitia, his face fearful. He was lost for words at the moment. There were some elders from the Cloud Hall who had visited the Cloud sect before. But the leader of the Cloud Hall had never personally been here. For a moment, Sao could not tell what was going on, but he was quick to recover. He bowed to Letitia and said respectfully, "I feel honored that Master Ning has personally come to the Cloud sect. I will report this to our leader immediately." It was up to Kenneth to judge if the person before him was the leader of the Cloud Hall or not. Sao only needed to perform his duty and pass the information to the leader. With that, Sao jumped onto his flying chariot and rushed into the Cloud sect. "Sao, why are you in such a hurry? What has happened?" one of his companions asked. But Sao didn't have the time to talk to him. He didn't pause, ignoring the steward as he headed straight to the hall. "Crazy idiot," the steward cursed at Sao. The other stewards were also baffled. What had just happened? They turned, only to find 3 people standing at the entrance of the Cloud sect, the cultivation level of whom they couldn't figure out. They were all startled and then became anxious as they thought of how Sao had left in a hurry. It didn't matter who these 3 people were. All they knew was that they weren't someone they could afford to offend. Moments after Sao had left, a burly figure rushed over to the entrance. It was Kenneth, the leader of the Cloud sect. Master Shi, Master Shi. The stewards were good at judging situations through people's expressions. As they watched Master Shi hurry over, they assumed that the 3 people standing at the entrance of the sect were someone important. But they didn't have a clue who these 3 people were. When Kenneth arrived, he first saw Zen and was pleasantly surprised. When he saw Letitia, his expression became respectful. "Greetings, Master Ning. I did not know that you would come in person. I'm sorry I didn't come out to greet you. Please forgive me." Letitia rarely showed up in the Cloud Hall. Kenneth was only a steward, and despite having held the position for so many years, he was still not qualified to ascend to the position of an elder since his cultivation had stopped at the internal elixir realm. The stewards' hearts began to race as they heard the name, Master Ning, and saw the courtesy with which their leader was treating the woman. There was no divine kingdom in the central region, but the leader of the Cloud Hall enjoyed a status on par with that of an emperor of a divine kingdom. The eastern region, where the Cloud sect was situated, could only be considered as an annexed territory of the Cloud Hall. They had never thought that the leader of the Cloud Hall would come to a place like the eastern region. And what was she doing here? But the stewards were swift to react. They followed Kenneth and bowed respectfully to greet Letitia as they said, "Greetings, Master Ning." In actuality, with their strength, they weren't qualified to meet and bow to Letitia. But no matter which rank they belonged to, all warriors hoped to reach higher levels through hard practice. Although the chances of them becoming Letitia's subordinates were slim, they still treasured the chance to pay their respects to the supreme leader. Sao hurried back on his flying chariot. The moment he saw everyone bowing to the fairy-like woman, he knew for sure that she was the leader of the Cloud Hall. He jumped down from the flying chariot and stood alongside the other stewards, greeting Letitia with a low and respectful bow. Letitia looked at Sao and said, "I've heard something about the saints. Sao is a dutiful person, why would he be relegated?" The moment Letitia uttered the words, Kenneth's scalp began to tingle in nervousness. How could he not be nervous when the leader was questioning him? He suddenly remembered what had happened to Sao in relation with Zen. At the time, he had indeed gravely punished the few saints who were involved. However, these saints had deep relations with the 7 noble clans, and he could not suppress all of them. Since Sao did not have any background, he had assumed that the saints had retaliated against him. But he was a leader of a sect and he had so many affairs to deal with. How could he have the time to attend to every single thing that happened in the sect? But this time, Zen had arrived and happened to meet Sao, which was how Letitia had gotten wind of this. Kenneth felt a sudden deep resentment towards those saints. He would take drastic measures to clean them up once the leader of the Cloud Hall left. "It's my fault. I failed to govern with the necessary stringency and I let some subordinates go unpunished. I will overhaul the Cloud sect. As for Sao, I will give him justice and the position he deserves, Kenneth said, bowing even lower. The other stewards looked at Sao and felt their hearts tighten. The leader of the Cloud Hall had personally asked about Sao and Master Shi had promised him a position. It was a given that Sao's fate was now going to change. If a wall starts tottering, everyone wants to push it, or so the saying went. Ever since Sao had been removed from his original position, this group of stewards had often bullied him. But now, luck had turned in Sao's favor. Sao was now excited. He hadn't expected his fate to change with just a few casual words. Letitia smiled at Kenneth's seriousness and nodded. All right, she said. I'm here to accompany Zen on his travels. You don't have to be so nervous. Relief flooded through Kenneth. This was the first time in history that the leader of the Cloud Hall had personally come to the Cloud sect. He had been frightened to have been questioned by Letitia in the beginning. Take it easy, Master Shi. Don't be so nervous, Zen said to him with a faint smile. Please don't call me Master Shi anymore. Just address me by my name, Kenneth replied rather obsequiously. Strength decided one's position in the world of martial artists. Zen had left the Cloud sect, but his strength had long since reached a level that Kenneth could only look up to. He felt a little ashamed and flustered as Zen called him a master. Zen, however, answered seriously. I'm from the Cloud sect, it's normal to call you master. I don't think there is anything inappropriate. Kenneth felt he had no choice but to accept it, since Zen was insisting so much. He sighed with emotion. He could see that Zen was someone who placed a high value on old friendships. In fact, Kenneth had done nothing to help him before Zen had taken part in the All Peaks competition. Zen had earned all the resources he had relied on for practice through his own efforts. Kenneth had not expected Zen to become the strongest warrior in the central region within just a few years. Kenneth knew all about Letitia and Zen's wedding ceremony which had taken place a while ago. But the Cloud sect had only sent them a lavish gift. The people who were invited to the wedding ceremony were all leaders of the third-grade sects. Although the Cloud sect was affiliated to the Cloud Hall, it wasn't qualified enough to attend the wedding ceremony since it was only a second-grade sect. And now, Zen had suddenly returned to the eastern region. It was true that Zen's family was in the eastern region, but what concerned Zen the most was still the Sky Princess Aura. Letitia and Margaret followed Kenneth and Zen for a tour of the Cloud sect. As they moved ahead, Zen asked Kenneth through his life vitality, Master Shi, where is Master Su? Kenneth had expected Zen to inquire about this, so he replied truthfully, after you left the eastern region, Aura was still confined in the royal palace. But half a year later, I brought her back to the Cloud sect. She then returned to Drizzle Peak and did her job as a master. Kenneth had promised Zen that as long as he was around, nobody could harm Aura. He said that he couldn't help Aura grab the throne, but he could guarantee her safety. A year after the promise, when news of Zen's rise in fame in the martial arts contest reached Kenneth, he changed his mind. Kenneth knew of the relationship between Aura and Zen. He knew that in the future, Zen would definitely become a core member of the Cloud Hall. Kenneth arrived at the Burning Sky Palace the day after he had obtained information about Zen's achievement in the martial arts contest and kicked Rei off the throne in front of all the civil and military officials. He then released Aura from her house arrest. Chapter 949, Battle. After Cain disappeared, Kenneth was the only representative of the Cloud Hall in the eastern region, so who in the Burning Sky Palace could stand against him? The Burning Sky Empire was merely an empire of mortals. They were as weak as infants in front of the warriors. No matter who the emperor was, what the powerful warriors decided was taken as the final word. The officials of the imperial court were stunned at seeing what had happened, but no one dared say anything about it. As for the several internal Elixir Realm warriors who lived in the Burning Sky Palace, none of them were willing to meddle in the matter. Kenneth had given Aura two options. The first had been to depose Rei and ascend to the throne. The second one was to head for the central region to be with Zen. However, Aura's decision surprised Kenneth. She did not choose to kill Rei to become the first empress of the Burning Sky Empire. She also did not leave the eastern region. Instead, she went back to Drizzle Peak of the Cloud sect to continue to be a master. Kenneth told Zen about what Aura had done while he had not been present in the eastern region. Zen nodded lightly, a smile appearing on his face. It had to be said that Kenneth had done well enough. However, it surprised Zen that Aura was willing to stay at Drizzle Peak permanently. The two of them spoke through life vitality. What are you guys talking about? Letitia asked curiously. Kenneth was filled with embarrassment. Since Zen was using his life vitality to communicate with him, he naturally did not want to let the two women next to him in on the conversation. Kenneth could not reveal what they were talking about. He did not know what to say to Letitia. Zen smiled. "It's nothing," he said. "Just some events that happened at the Cloud Sect. Tia, Margaret, now that you two are here, you should ask Master Shi to take you around. I have something to deal with." Margaret stayed silent, her eyes fixed on Zen. When she saw the gleam in his eyes, she immediately guessed at what the matter was. On the other hand, Letitia could not figure out what was going on. "What is it?" she asked again. "Master Ning, please follow me," Kenneth said quickly. "I will be showing you the various peaks of the Cloud Sect later." Zen made up an excuse and left. Margaret and Letitia followed Kenneth, heading straight to the other direction. The moment Kenneth entered the main hall, he asked the maids to serve them food. However, before they could enter the hall, Margaret came to stand at the gates. Letitia glanced at Margaret. "What are you doing?" Margaret smiled. "Nothing. I can sense that something is wrong." "What's wrong this time?" Letitia asked her. Margaret did not respond to this. She raised her head and entered the main hall. Letitia frowned, not knowing what was going on in Margaret's head. She stepped forward cautiously and blocked Margaret's path, asking, "What exactly happened? Is this about Zen?" Margaret, of course, knew Letitia very well. She could tell that Letitia was clueless about this. However, Margaret did not want to interfere in Zen's matters, or rather, she did not dare meddle at all. Letitia had no such qualms. Margaret kept her in suspense just to lure her into questioning about what had happened. Needless to say, Letitia was curious about Margaret's behavior. Margaret smiled. "Yes, but I think we should not meddle in his affairs." "What on earth is going on?" Suspicious, Letitia asked her in a low voice. In the hall, Kenneth had already ordered the maids to prepare tea and dessert for Letitia and Margaret. Even the tables and chairs had been arranged for them. He was now patiently waiting for them to enter the hall. For a moment, he considered gathering the elite disciples of the 33 Peaks of Cloud Sect together and letting them perform their martial arts before Letitia. However, the two women still stood at the entrance, chatting in low voices. "Zen was born in the eastern region," Margaret said indifferently. "He is not a man who associates with a lot of women, but I think he is still affectionate towards someone here. I wonder who that person is." Letitia was obviously jealous at this. She was not like Margaret. Eager to be the best and possessive about everything, she could not stand to share the man she loved. Allowing Margaret to remain by Zen's side had already touched a nerve. Now it seemed that Margaret had not been the first woman she had to endure it all. Perhaps not the last one either. Although Letitia tried her best to be in control of her emotions, the expression on her face betrayed her discomfort. Seeing how upset she was, Margaret giggled. "It is okay for men to have several wives. If a man doesn't have at least a few of them, that would be considered abnormal." "Nonsense." Letitia rushed into the main hall. Before Kenneth could get a chance to lead her to her seat, she sat down by herself in a huff, leaning against the giant dragon throne in the middle of the hall. Seeing the indignant expression on Letitia's face, Kenneth tensed up, not daring to speak. Margaret walked up to Letitia calmly and sat down beside her. "No matter what, this is Zen's choice," she said to her seriously. "He is already your husband, so you can't be this angry at him." Although Letitia and Margaret were not close like sisters or even on good terms with each other, they seemed to live in harmony, for they had stayed together for quite some time. Now, sharing such an experience of misfortune, they had pity for each other. "Don't you want to go and have a look?" Margaret suddenly said in a low voice. Letitia didn't even think before replying, "I don't want to." "You really don't want to?" Margaret slid closer to Letitia. "I don't want to." Letitia's words were clearly not as resolute as before. Seeing the mocking expression on Margaret's face, she said, "Let's sneak over then." Kenneth tried to intervene, hesitating for a while before Letitia interrupted him coldly. "Kenneth, where is Zen?" Surprised, Kenneth did not know how to answer her. Once again, an awkward expression surfaced on his face. "Do you want me to look for him myself?" Letitia asked as she stared at Kenneth. "I wouldn't dare do that. Zen went to Drizzle Peak. I will lead you there," Kenneth responded almost immediately. Letitia was the top leader after all, so Kenneth would rather offend Zen than her. Besides, Zen was a man more magnanimous than a woman. Even though Letitia was usually decisive, Kenneth didn't believe that she could be generous in matters of affection. With Kenneth in the lead, the two women went straight toward the Drizzle Peak. A few months ago, to resist the black energy, Zen had destroyed the mountains of the Great World. However, in the end, he had preserved those of the eastern region, including the Drizzle Peak. Otherwise, the 33 peaks of the Cloud Sect would have been annihilated at the time. Staying at the bottom of the mountain for a while, Zen flew upward. The mountainside of Drizzle Peak was where the outer disciples lived. Above the mountainside was where the masters were. When Zen flew over, he saw a large number of warriors gather there. The battle ring, Zen's eyes flashed as he took a long breath. He slowly approached them. 2 disciples in black robes could be seen fighting on the battle ring. Why are the inner disciples fighting here? Zen thought, a bit puzzled. A smile split his lips when he spotted someone. There's Nori, he muttered. Nori had been Zen's first friend when he had entered the Cloud sect. His temperament had clearly undergone a great change, different from what it had been when before. Most importantly, he had already become an inner disciple. His talent was average and he didn't have enough willpower. Most of the time, it was only because of Zen's encouragement that Nori was able to brace himself and progress on his cultivation. Back then, Zen had stepped up and taken action against the master of the Mo clan because of Nori. It seemed that after he left, Nori had put in a great deal of effort into his cultivation. At the moment, he was standing on the battle ring, his life vitality exploding through. But his opponent's strength was not to be taken lightly, who might be even more powerful than Nori. However, Nori's willpower was unmatched. No matter how strong the opponent's counterattack, Nori could resist it. He would not be willing to retreat or give in. Nori had indeed changed. Zen sighed silently, but as he continued to observe the battle, he frowned. The other warrior on the battle ring was obviously much stronger. He seemed to fight Nori effortlessly. There was an obvious playful expression on his face as he continued to strain Nori with his attacks. It was noisy but Zen could still hear the warrior's comment. You people are delusional. The Drizzle Peak doesn't have it in them to be ranked as number 1 among the 33 peaks. He spoke with a sneer. Only Zen was the outstanding one here. After he left, this place turned just as ordinary as before. Chapter 950, They Met Again. The inner disciple's face reflected his arrogance and craziness, his attacks getting fiercer by the minute. But a greenish-gray aura remained on the surface of Nori's body. His opponent wouldn't be able to knock him down even if he let out a shower of attacks against him. The aura seemed unique, indicating that perhaps Nori had had his own fortuitous encounters. Nori, you can do it. You can't lose to this guy from Skytop Peak. Defend our dignity. We are the number 1 peak. Zen smiled at the crowd's cheers. This battle was between the Skytop Peak and the Drizzle Peak. The Drizzle Peak had ranked first back when Zen had defeated Roche and Patrick. Roche was from the Skytop Peak, which ended up second. It was completely unexpected that this situation had remained the same to this day. Bang! Nori had blocked many of his opponent's attacks, but one finally made it through to hit him and sent him flying to the edge of the battle ring. The black-robed disciple sneered as he walked towards Nori. He raised the weapon in his hand and asked, "Are you going to roll off yourself, or should I help you with it?" Nori gritted his teeth and then stubbornly clenched his jaw. The life vitality within his body began to gather. Despite his disadvantage, he still wanted to retaliate. "Looks like you won't give up. I'll simply have to disable you then." The disciple of the Skytop Peak sneered again, raised the weapon in his hand and was about to smash it down on him. A voice sounded from across the crowd. Enough. The crowd parted as a woman made her way to the front. She was wearing a yellow waistcoat over a light yellow dress that accentuated her slim figure. Her face was as beautiful as a fairy's, but it had been 4 years and she had become more mature. "Master Su," Zen murmured as his eyes lit up. Aura did not see him as he was floating in the air. She walked up to the side of the battle ring and said to Nori, "You've done well enough. Surrender, Nori." But Master Su, Nori hesitated, unconvinced. Aura smiled and said, "This is not perseverance but recklessness. A warrior should know when to surrender." As she looked at Nori, Aura was reminded of Zen. After all, not everyone had talent like Zen's. While perseverance was a very important quality, it was only when used together with talent that one could achieve the greatest of heights. But it looked like Aura's words didn't have an effect on Nori, who stood up and charged at his opponent. "You're courting death. Since you refuse to admit defeat, I will disable you." The inner disciple sneered again as he increased his speed. He landed a lightning-fast kick at Nori, knocking him to the ground, and then raised his fist and punched his belly. Aura frowned. She wanted to stop him, but she was still too slow. A figure flashed out of the sky and landed inside the battle ring. He gently pushed the inner disciple away from Nori. At this push, the inner disciple felt a force that he could not resist, and stumbled a dozen steps backwards before coming to a stop. He stared darkly at Zen. Nori had originally thought that he was going to suffer a miserable defeat, but this figure had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. He raised his head to look at the figure in white, but his expression quickly morphed into one of utter disbelief. It's you. Nori didn't know how to address Zen in that moment. A few inner disciples, led by Worth, emerged from the crowd. They had also been watching the fight between Nori and the inner disciple, but they hadn't expected anyone to appear and interfere with the fight. Worth and Zen were familiar with each other, and though Zen's temperament had changed, Worth was still able to recognize him after years of not having seen him. Zen, it's really Zen. Zen is back. At first, many disciples of the Drizzle Peak hadn't recognized Zen, but after someone had shouted his name for the first time, it seemed like everyone had awakened from a deep slumber. The mountain seemed to boil with excitement. The name Zen was the glory of Drizzle Peak. Any news of Zen's presence in the central region was always relayed to Drizzle Peak and spread throughout the Cloud Sect in the eastern region. Zen, the inner disciple of the Skytop Peak, was evidently shocked. The person standing before him was the strongest warrior in the central region. And he used to be one of the disciples of Drizzle Peak. Aura trembled as she saw Zen. She stared at him for a few seconds before she turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Zen sensed Aura's movement and hurriedly pulled Nori off the ground. In a flash, he followed Aura, calling after her. Aura was wearing embroidered shoes with silk flowers that she didn't bother about as she quickly walked forward. She did not know where she was going, but she wanted to leave this place. Master Su. Zen chased after Aura and shouted. Aura looked straight ahead, her expression cold and distant. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear before shaking her head and saying, I am no longer your master. Zen had been promoted to become one of the disciples of the Cloud Hall a long time ago, which meant that she couldn't be considered his master anymore. Zen smiled playfully and said, all right. I'll call you Aura. I used to be your master, and I'm older than you. How can you call me by my name? Aura said coldly, still facing away from him. Then how about, Sister Aura? Zen smiled, relaxing a little. Aura did not reply. When Kenneth had entered the royal palace and kicked Rei off the throne, Aura had guessed that one of two things had happened. Either Zen or Kane had returned. She hadn't had to wait too long before she got her answer. She had heard of Zen's various achievements in the central region. He was comparable to any talent of a 4th or 5th grade sect. He had been able to suppress all the talents from the central region when he was at the Illuminating Soul Realm. At that time, Aura had had many choices laid out before her. Kenneth respected her choice, and no matter what she wanted to do, he would try his best to cooperate. But she had given up. She had returned to Drizzle Peak and was quietly serving as a master. In fact, deep down, Aura knew that she was waiting, but what she was waiting for, she did not know. Or perhaps, she did not dare admit to herself. The path of cultivation was an extremely long one. Zen had now stepped into a new level, a level that she couldn't even hope to reach. However, she was still waiting and focusing all her energy on the Drizzle Peak, hoping to find more talented disciples, giving them the greatest help, and hoping for a better result. Only by doing so, would she be able to be patient for a little longer. 4 years wasn't a long time, and she hadn't thought that Zen would come back. In these 4 years, she had heard that Zen had offended a strong warrior from the central region, gone missing, returned, looked for a capable doctor, and then left the central region for a foreign land that was far beyond her imagination, in order to save the leader of the Cloud Hall. The eastern region was too far away from the central region, and the information had not been transmitted smoothly. This meant that every emotion stayed with Aura for a long time until the next message was sent, before being replaced by another emotion, be it excitement, worry, hope, relief, or gratification. But Zen had returned today. Have I been waiting for him? She asked herself. Her mind was a mess. She could not think straight and did not know the answer. Suddenly, her body trembled, as a pair of hands wrapped around her. Let me go, Aura said, nervousness lacing her voice. She was still a master, even if she was not that older than the disciples of Drizzle Peak. Many disciples on the mountainside were looking at her. She felt embarrassed and shy. At her words, Zen hugged her even tighter and didn't let go for a long time. I'm sorry I'm late, he said apologetically. He had promised that he would come back. On the other side of the Drizzle Peak, Margaret and Letitia were hiding behind a rock. Margaret smiled and said, look, I guessed right. Chapter 951. Go to the fairy palace again. Letitia was in an extremely bad mood. He has so many women. He's not a good guy. She fumed. Margaret didn't know why, but the sight of the normally dignified girl's pout made her smile. Maybe she found it endearing. Margaret wasn't sure, but Letitia's jealousy seemed to cancel the bitterness in her heart. But Zen got to know this woman first, she teased. I don't care. No matter what, he's not a good guy. Letitia huffed, her face red in anger. Margaret tutted, if Zen was a bad guy, he would have just left and never come back. His righteousness is what made him keep his promise. But Letitia still adamantly shook her head as tears welled up in her eyes. No, he is not a good guy. She stubbornly whined. Margaret sighed in resignation and extended her sleeved arm towards her. Letitia flinched at her sudden movement. What are you doing? She asked. Margaret ignored her question and used her sleeve to wipe away the tears from her face. He's not a good guy, but he's still our husband, she reminded Letitia. Her words stunned the crying girl in silence. Margaret was right. No matter what Letitia thought of Zen, at the end of the day, he was still her husband who she had to stick with through thick and thin. She knew she could get very possessive of him, but she had already known that someone like him couldn't belong to her entirely. It was time she swallowed this bitter truth. Kenneth, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel a bit jealous as he looked at Letitia. Zen is really so awesome, he thought to himself as he floated further away. It was normal for a warrior to have multiple women. Kenneth himself had dozens of women. Zen only had 3, but the thing was, all his women were top-notch. Letitia was the leader of Central Region's biggest sect. Although the woman beside her was unknown to Kenneth, he knew her background couldn't be simple. Zen's brides were sure to be of high status. How could they ever be compared with ordinary women? He just married Master Ning and held a grand wedding ceremony not too long ago, but here he is with Aura. Zen is indeed a real man, Kenneth thought, admiring Zen from the bottom of his heart. However, he also could not help but steal a glance at Letitia. She looks rather furious, but there's nothing she can do about it. Zen took his time comforting Aura. After a while, the topic finally shifted to her father. Cain had once been a steward of Cloud Hall, but disappeared during a mission. There was no news of him until now. Fortunately, Zen was able to gather the information regarding Cain's whereabouts within the memories of the world's will, which contained all the happenings in this great world. A trace of sadness visibly appeared on his face. Your father has passed away in some relic in the Central Region, he told Aura. The girl's eyes dimmed. Oh, is that so? She muttered sadly. She had already expected this since her father had been gone for so long, but there was always that small sliver of hope in her heart that he was alive. Getting this information from Zen finally confirmed her fears. I will have Cloud Hall send someone to bring back his remains, he assured her. Aura nodded quietly. She was more reserved compared to Letitia, and now that Zen had let go of her, she purposely put some distance between the two of them. Meanwhile, Margaret saw that Letitia had finally calmed down. She grabbed the other girl's hand and pulled her up. Come on. Letitia frowned and tried to pull away. What are you doing? Margaret smiled. Let's go and say our greetings. No, Letitia stubbornly refused. Margaret shook her head at her childishness. Who knew the leader of the biggest sect in Central Region could act like this? In the end, we still have to get to know each other. How can you avoid that? She reasoned. Letitia bit her lip, unable to think of a reply to Margaret's sound logic. She helplessly let Margaret drag her away as they flew towards the mountainside. Margaret's way of thinking made her baggage much lighter compared to Letitia's. So long as she could accompany Zen to the very end, then it was paradise. It did not matter how many women he met and fell for along the way. Zen's expression, on the other hand, couldn't be painted once he saw Margaret and Letitia arrive. He had no idea how to deal with his relationship with 3 women, but he had to force himself to introduce them to each other. Margaret, fortunately, was extremely sociable and greeted Aura first. Letitia merely stood to the side quietly. The 3 of them looked unsurely at each other, not really knowing what to make of the situation. Each one of them felt differently about this arrangement, but it was a harmonious first meeting, for now at least. Zen felt he got lucky this time for passing this kind of test. The next 2 days were spent in the Cloud sect. According to reports, Nori, with his own strength, had regained his position in the Mo clan. Worth, on the other hand, had officially taken over the Zhang clan's business. It seemed everyone managed to accomplish a lot over the past few years. After those 2 days, Zen headed south, back to the Luo clan in Xi County. Although its location wasn't in the Burning Sky imperial capital, the Luo clan's sudden rise in power couldn't be ignored. They had even managed to surpass the force of the 7 noble clans, mainly because of Zen. They knew his rise and fall in Central Region. He had even disappeared for 2 years, but no one ever dared to offend the Luo clan in case Zen ever returned. That was how much they feared him. This fear from others allowed Luo clan's influence to expand rapidly, making them an unbeatable force in Xi County. Zen's presence was now celebrated in the Luo clan. He had also brought with him treasures and precious cultivation methods. Of course, these things he brought were just mere, ordinary trinkets for him, but they were extremely valuable to the Luo clan. Zen was careful not to give them too much of the good stuff. Nevertheless, he helped them when he could. Zen knew he was fated to live an extremely long life, and when he came back again, probably many years later, the entire clan might have already been replaced with new faces. He also knew he wouldn't be able to care for them forever, since he would need to focus on his training and preparation to ascend to the upper world. It was a good thing that the eastern region was under the control of Cloud Sect, which in turn was under the control of Cloud Hall. Even if he didn't ask, the Cloud Sect would still look after the Luo clan for him. However, living well would still depend on the capabilities of the clan itself. He could only hope the best for them. A few days later, he left the Luo clan and went west. This confused his ladies. Since Zen had already finished his tasks, he should be rushing back to the central region. Why were they heading west? Zen, of course, refused to tell them and chose to act mysterious. He simply told them that he was bringing them to a mysterious, secluded place. This mysterious, secluded place turned out to be the Dragon Valley of the Cloudy Mountain. It was the location of the fairy palace that Zen had entered before. This fairy palace was extremely strange. Aside from Zen, the only person that had ever come here was Immortal Mist. But, even with his cultivation level at the Spirit Supreme Realm, Immortal Mist was still unable to control the fairy palace and had only managed to obtain one more token than Zen. The token he got had the character, Thunder, on it. He had given it to Zen, who had initially gotten the one with, Wind. According to what Immortal Mist told him, this fairy palace did not have a name, since nobody, in the entire 100,000 supreme worlds of the universe, had the qualifications to name it. Zen thought Immortal Mist might have been exaggerating, but he knew that it was a place he definitely had to explore before he ascended to the upper world. He did not know if he'd be able to obtain the fairy palace's secrets despite reaching the life and death realm, but he would have to see. So this is where you wanted to take us? Letitia said, looking at the empty valley. Follow me, he said, walking towards a seemingly insignificant corner. He slowly walked between two bamboo sticks before a green light flashed and he disappeared right before their very eyes. Chapter 952, Meets All Again. The sudden flash which marked Zen's figure disappearing left traces of curiosity on Aura's face. This was something exotic. Is that a transmission array? The eastern region wasn't exactly marked for its construction and presence of transmission arrays. The only one that had been built within the Cloud Sect was the one that led to the Cloud Road. Even that particular array was now in a dilapidated condition due to its lack of use and maintenance. To transfer a person through a transmission array required the use of a supreme life vitality crystal, and even someone as powerful and rich as Kenneth would be reluctant to do that. Therefore, when Aura saw the transmission array, she felt a little surprised. As for Letitia and Margaret, their expressions were unfazed. Transmission arrays in the central region were common, day-to-day objects. Sometimes, even some commonplace merchants who were slightly wealthy enough would choose to use transmission arrays for transporting their goods. Although it was expensive, it was safe and convenient. Zen hadn't told them where he was leading them, but in Letitia's eyes, even if this small eastern region had any secrets to keep, they would be nothing significant. Such a small place simply could not have some secret land. But in any case, she was willing to accompany her husband wherever he went. As soon as Letitia stepped into the space between the two bamboos, a white light flashed around her and she found herself in a strange place. A look of surprise appeared on her face now. It looks like this transmission array does not have any space channel, and I don't sense the power of the space law associated with it. That is unusual, she muttered. Behind her, Margaret and Aura also passed through the two bamboos and found themselves in the same place. The scenery around them was stunning due to the sheer magnitude of its size. These trees are so huge. Is this the world of giants? Aura looked at the trees that stretched tall as a mountain, her eyes filled with shock. At first glance, the surrounding scenery looked very normal indeed. But after careful observation for about a second or two, everything seemed to have been magnified countless times. Even the weeds that were growing below the trees were the size of a common house. It was as if this world was created specifically for giants. Zen chuckled when he saw their shocked expressions. When he had first arrived at this place, he was only at the nature level. He had been scared by the scenery too, and at that time, there was an unbelievably large white tiger on the other side of the enchanted barrier. Fortunately, the barrier saved his life. What is this place? Margaret asked curiously. In fact, to be perfectly honest, what this place wasn't important to her at all. But seeing that Zen seemed to want to surprise them, she decided to play along. This man had her heart, after all. Letitia and Aura were both curious in reality and looking towards Zen. Zen smiled cunningly and replied, "Come with me. I'll show you." He began leading the way towards some unknown destination. Hardly had he taken a couple of steps when he suddenly heard Margaret and Aura scream. A burst of life vitality rushed out from Letitia's body and she turned around, looking behind her with extreme vigilance. From behind the enchanted barrier appeared dozens of leopards. Just like the white tiger Zen had encountered on his previous trip, these leopards were extremely large and seemed to have been magnified in all aspects. When they opened their mouths to reveal their fangs, the company saw that they were as tall as a human. Wild beasts again. Zen's eyes flashed and he assured his companions, "Don't worry. They can't enter the enchanted barrier. If they try to even touch the enchanted barrier, they will die." He was sizing up the leopards as he spoke. When he had first come here, he was only a nature-level warrior and was unable to discern the cultivation level of the white tiger. But now, Zen had already reached the life and death realm. Those days of blissful ignorance were long gone. However, when he tried to size up the leopards, he was instantly left more shocked than he had ever been in his entire life. He could not discern the cultivation level of leopards either. In theory, a level 10 beast was equivalent to a life and death realm warrior, a level 11 beast was equivalent to a soul sea realm warrior and a level 12 beast was equivalent to a spirit supreme realm warrior. What the classifications said beyond that was still unknown. With Zen's current level of cultivation, he could easily sense the cultivation level of a spirit supreme realm warrior. But he still couldn't perceive just how strong the leopards were. This could only mean one thing: the cultivation level of these leopards was still beyond his imagination. It seemed that the location of this fairy palace and this space were still unfathomable to Zen. In fact, in retrospect, that was to be expected. Even Immortal Mist with all his power was unable to truly control this fairy palace. He only had one more token with the word, thunder, on it than Zen. So how could Zen hope to understand the workings of this place? Roar, roar, the leopards growled in a guttural voice as they slowly approached the enchanted barrier. When Aura and Margaret heard Zen's words, they no longer looked as nervous as before. The two women had no doubts about this man's words. If he was saying that they were safe behind the enchanted barrier, then they were safe for sure. As for Letitia, her face still looked a little pale. Although she believed Zen's words, with her higher cultivation, she could feel the strength of these ferocious beasts. These gigantic leopards actually had a cultivation level that, just like Zen, she couldn't see through. That was the primary reason she was scared more than the other two women. Zen's expression was indifferent. If these leopards were stupid enough to pounce on him, they would end up just like the white tiger 3 years ago, mere skeletons. However, the leopards continued to circle around the enchanted barrier cautiously, as if they were extremely afraid of it. In the end, they only roared helplessly in a furious tone from the other side and did not choose to send themselves to death. The intelligence of a beast was not related to its strength. Some beasts' cultivation level was very low, but their intelligence was abnormally high. Some were even smarter than humans. On the contrary, some beasts, whose strength was incomparably high, lacked so much intelligence so as to still be considered like common garden rats. These leopards were smarter than the white tiger by a few notches but not smart enough to instantly know they were defeated. Otherwise, they wouldn't have wasted their time in front of the enchanted barrier. "Let's go." Zen went up and held Letitia's hand, squeezing it and giving her a reassuring smile. Seeing that scene, Margaret ran over with a smile. "Hold my hand, too." She took the initiative to grab Zen's other hand before he could respond. As for Aura, she merely smiled and silently followed behind the three. After they traveled some distance, a fairy palace appeared before them. The gate to the palace was about 10,000 feet high. This meant that even a mountain-like giant would be able to smoothly pass through it. "Whoa, this thing is huge," Letitia uttered out in astonishment. "I wonder how tall the people who live in this fairy palace are." Margaret muttered under her lips. Zen smiled and took the lead by stepping through the gate. Not long after they walked along the wide plaza, everyone suddenly discovered that the ground began to tremble. Boom, boom, boom. Footsteps as loud as a huge drum set came their way, and 2 huge puppets charged out from the inner courtyard. Seeing their enormous size and momentum, the 3 women let out a soft cry. Zen, Zen. However, with a swift movement, Zen took out a token from his space ring. It was the one inscribed with the word, wind, on it that he had received from Saul when he had left the fairy palace last time. Saul had told him that this token would allow him to control the outer courtyard and enter the fairy palace. It was only a token. While it was true that he was the owner of this fairy palace, it didn't grant him any authority over the place. The two enormous puppets immediately slowed down the moment Zen brought the token out of his space ring. Although they were still striding forward, it was obvious that they had no intention of attacking the company now. Boom, 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 they walked up to Zen and knelt down on one knee. Zen nodded slightly, and then called out to the three of them. Though they were hesitant, the three continued walking into the inner courtyard. Actually, at Zen's current strength level, these puppets couldn't have hurt him at all. However, since he had a token that allowed him to control them, he was obviously not going to waste any time fighting them. After entering the inner courtyard, they saw a huge pond in front of them. Inside the pond, countless carps were rolling about. Zen, who was still holding the token in his hand, walked straight into the enormous pavilion with the three women. He then began to move the statues in the pavilion and arrange them according to some rule. They managed to simply pass through the pavilion. Soon after that, a voice floated their way. Zen, my friend, it's been a long time. I've been waiting for you for 4 years now. Not far away from them, stood a middle-aged man wearing a silken robe. This was Saul, who had given him the token the last time and who had been separated from Zen for quite a while now. He looked like a puppet too, but a soul was hiding within the puppet. Zen smiled and nodded at his friend. You were right, it's been a while. How's everything going around here? You tell me, in 4 years, you managed to jump from a nature-level warrior to a life-and-death realm warrior. Your cultivation speed can be considered quite remarkable, Saul replied. But it's still not enough. Chapter 953, The True Path. Saul's words were confusing, and Letitia's face filled with astonishment. In just 4 years, Zen had advanced from a nature-level warrior to a life-and-death realm warrior. Yet Saul was saying that his cultivation speed was still not enough. Such a fast pace of breaking through could be considered extremely rare. At least in Letitia's knowledge, among all the years she had spent in the central region, she had never seen a person talented enough to have achieved such a fast speed. Just how high were this man's standards? However, what Saul said next made Letitia more shocked. He sighed and told Zen, and yes, I can see that although you are only at the life and death realm, your foundation is much more stable than ordinary warriors. In fact, I know that your strength is comparable to a Soul Sea Realm warrior. But it is still not enough. You cannot break through the barrier to the true path at this level, nor can you walk on it. Although I have some regrets, you still need to cultivate for a few years before coming back. Not enough, Letitia thought, speechless. Was this place still in the eastern region? Even a life and death realm warrior was not qualified to pass through. What sort of legacy did this fairy palace have? Hearing Saul's words, Zen did not seem to be dejected at all. Instead, he smiled and asked, what if I have this token? As he finished speaking, he took out the other token from his space ring. On the token in his hand was carved the word, Thunder. This token had been given to Zen by Immortal Mist, who himself had suffered the 5 aging processes. It had left him with only a strand of his remnant soul. If he had held onto this token, it would have been of no use, so he had given it to Zen as a gift, telling him that with this token, he could activate the true path. This fairy palace was of great importance. Before ascending to the upper world, Zen was going to try his best to control the fairy palace. To do so, he had to cross the true path. It was impossible to do so without that. Saul looked at the token in Zen's hand, and remarked in a calm voice, that's Mist's token. I guess he's passed away now. I didn't expect him to give his token to you. Yes, with this token, you can enter the true path without breaking the barrier. However, with your strength, even if you were to enter the true path, you would probably not be able to pass through the first stage. What's the benefit of passing the first stage? Zen asked and his eyes lit up at the prospect. Saul replied, there are a total of 8 tokens in the fairy palace, heaven, earth, water, fire, thunder, wind, mountain and valley. Other than the heaven and earth tokens, it is possible for you to obtain the other 6 tokens. These 2, I fear, are beyond you. 6 tokens, but I already have 2 of them, one with the word, thunder, and the other with the word, wind. What if I end up with a token with the same word? Zen asked curiously. Saul smiled, this will depend on your luck. There are no 2 ways about it. A look of helplessness appeared on Zen's face as he asked, and what's the use of obtaining the other tokens? Hearing this question, Saul waved his hand and pointed towards the entrance. With the token of wind, you will be able to enter and leave the fairy palace at will, just like you did this time. With the token of thunder, you can enter the true path. With the token of Valley, you can enter the pill refining workshop. The token of Fire allows you to enter the weapon refining workshop. With the token of Water, you can enter the library. With the token of Mountain. Like a tape recorder, Saul told Zen the use of every single token. Only after hearing his response did Zen fully understand that mastering these 6 tokens actually allowed him to gradually control everything in this fairy palace. However, each token could only correspond to one thing. And if he had 2 of the same, it wouldn't make any difference. He didn't know why the first master of this fairy palace had set it up in such a manner. This was truly making things difficult for anyone who entered the fairy palace. When he thought of this, Zen spoke again. Hang on, that's only 6. What's the use of the tokens of heaven and earth? Saul smiled and replied, when you've gathered the first 6 tokens, you can ask me again. I won't tell you about it now. Zen shrugged his shoulders. He knew Saul well enough. Whatever he was unwilling to answer, he would not answer no matter how many times he was asked. In any case, Zen had made up his mind. He would definitely enter the true path. Back then, when he had first entered the fairy palace, he had only obtained one thing, the sun moon stars picture. As for the weapon refining workshop, the pill refining workshop, the library and so on, he didn't even know how to enter them until now. Yet even at his current level of strength, he wouldn't be able to force his way in. Now that Zen was ready to ascend to the upper world, there was no way for him to retreat. Is the true path dangerous? Margaret asked in a concerned tone. She knew clearly that even if there was danger up ahead, Zen would not cower back in the slightest. Saul replied, that depends on Zen. The bigger the reward, the greater the risk. It was the same as Zen's every adventure. If there were no risk, wouldn't everyone be able to obtain the reward without any effort? What good would that be? Zen was just about to let Saul guide him into the true path when a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. I passed the trial last time. Can they also participate in the trial? Letitia had her own cultivation method, and the creature she had visualized was the ice phoenix. However, that did not mean that the contemplation pictures in the fairy palace were useless to Letitia, Margaret or Aura. If the 3 of them could enter the fairy palace to train, it would be of great use to them, and even better for them if they managed to obtain their own contemplation pictures. Saul nodded and replied, yes, they can. But they won't be able to get any token. Zen was the current owner of the fairy palace, and only he was qualified to obtain tokens. The previous owner of the fairy palace was Immortal Mist. When Zen had entered the fairy palace, Immortal Mist had already suffered the 5 aging processes, and was, in fact, already a dead man, left with nothing but a strand of his soul. And now, no one else was qualified to gain the recognition of the fairy palace unless Zen died. Okay, got it. Zen nodded his head cautiously as he turned around to look at the 3 women. He had asked for an answer from Saul, but he also didn't know if the 3 women would agree to accept the trial. As expected, the 3 women had different reactions to the idea. When Letitia found out about the opportunities that lay within the trial, she became very excited. As the leader of the Cloud Hall, she was as outstanding as she had always been and was also fearless of any trial or challenge that came her way. As for Aura, there was a trace of uncertainty on her face. Among the 3 women, her cultivation level was the lowest and she was only at the 4th grade of the Illuminating Soul Realm. Although she was willing to participate in the trial, she lacked the confidence that she had the strength to pass it. However, Saul told her that the difficulty of this trial would be adjusted according to one's cultivation level. Finally, there was Margaret. She was currently in a conflicted state of mind. Her cultivation level right now was at the internal elixir realm. However, if she did not use the power of the purple power world, she would probably be no match even for Aura. Her cultivation had been built up through resources. Her foundation was weak and unstable. Can I borrow some external force? Margaret asked. Saul sized up Margaret and replied, you seem to have the sky purple body. There are hidden space nodes in your body, and you can connect to the outside world. Then he shook his head and added, but no. It's impossible to borrow external force in here. Purple power body had a different name in Saul's mouth. Margaret did not care about the sky purple body at all. Since she could not borrow any external force, she might as well skip the trial. With her current strength, she would probably not be able to pass the trial. When she chose to give up, even Zen had no way of convincing her. Right now, under Saul's lead, Letitia and Aura were the first to undergo the trial. The trial didn't last long. An hour later, the 2 women both passed easily. Letitia looked calm and relaxed, while Aura looked completely in contrast to that. Even after she had left the illusion world, her face was still as pale as a sheet. It was only after Zen gave her a pill to calm her down that she finally relaxed. Letitia had obtained the cloud and flying birds picture from her trial, which was only second to the sun moon stars picture. Her talent and strength were already extremely strong, so obtaining this result was not surprising. As for Aura, her result was extremely surprising. She had actually obtained the third picture, the 9-day cycle picture. Seeing that Letitia and Aura had obtained their own contemplation pictures, Margaret felt a little jealous in her heart. But she still knew her own limits. If it weren't for her purple power body, she would be the weakest among the 3 women. She swore to herself that she would cultivate harder in the Apeiron Tower in the future so that Letitia and Aura would not look down upon her. After the 2 women passed the trial, Saul led Zen towards the true path. They walked along a long, narrow road, until finally, before them appeared a pale yellow wall. Chapter 954, Avoiding Shortcuts. This wall is the true barrier, said Saul as he looked at the pale yellow wall. Zen walked forward and stretched a hand to touch the wall. This barrier was blocking the road ahead of him. According to Saul, he would have to break this barrier if he wanted to move forward. But since Zen had the thunder token, he had the right to pass the barrier directly. Zen's eyes flashed as he looked at the pale yellow wall. Is it really impossible for me to break this barrier? You can try if you want, Saul said with a smile. But it was Letitia who answered with a question, can I have a go? No problem, Saul replied. Zen smiled and stepped aside at Letitia's interest in the wall. Letitia liked to take challenges. She and Zen were both at the first level of the life and death realm. In her opinion, there might be a gap between her strength and Zen's, but the gap should not be that great, which was why she wanted to test out her strength. Everyone stepped aside, giving way as Letitia walked forward gracefully to stand in front of the true barrier. Her gaze was fixed on the wall in front of her, the life vitality within her body beginning to surge. Aru. As more and more ice crystals began to condense, an ice phoenix appeared beside Letitia. Saul said, it's the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess. It is a pretty good cultivation method, but this cultivation method cannot be fully mastered. It can only be considered an abridged version. Letitia's heart skipped a beat at Saul's words. This cultivation method was considered to be a top-notch martial skill in the central region. Saul was a man who had knowledge and experience that was way beyond anyone's imagination. If Saul had called the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess as something good, it would have been an extremely powerful cultivation method. But here he was, saying that it was only an abridged one. The Sutra of Empyrean Goddess was a cultivation method that Letitia's master, Imogen, had passed down to her. Even Imogen didn't know about its origins. An abridged cultivation method? Letitia asked curiously. Saul nodded and replied, yes, this Sutra of Empyrean Goddess has not been completed yet. All these years, I have been flipping through all the myriad cultivation methods in the library. I know I'm not wrong. It was abridged, but Letitia had gotten too far into this cultivation method and had no choice but to stick with it to the end. Letitia gently turned her fingers, causing the ice phoenix to coil around her arm. She looked straight at the wall, a cold chill spreading out of her body. She is truly worthy of being the leader of the Cloud Hall. What a formidable aura, Aura said, a mix of shock and awe lacing her voice. Letitia's strength was much higher than her own, and the level that Letitia had reached was far beyond her imagination. Margaret snorted as she thought, what's so special about that? I'll become more powerful than her once I enter the Apeiron Tower. The ice phoenix in Letitia's hand swirled faster. The cold air that emanated from her became even chillier. The temperature in the area several dozens of feet around her dropped drastically. As the chilliness spread out, Margaret and Aura strained to withstand it. But a stream of protective life vitality spread out as Zen waved a hand, protecting the 2 women behind him. It wasn't long before Letitia's punch landed on the true barrier. Boom! A snow-white mark appeared on the true barrier at the impact, but didn't spread further. Instead, it began to shrink and a while later, disappeared. Zen nodded as he saw the extent of the power that Letitia had unleashed. The punch seemed to have no effect on the true barrier, the punch that no one in the central region could withstand the power of. Even Imogen and the other life and death realm cultivators couldn't handle it. She had entered the life and death realm after restarting her cultivation 9 times. Her strength was truly astonishing. Letitia merely smiled and shook her head at the wall that stood intact. She had expected that the true barrier wouldn't budge a lot, but she hadn't expected that she couldn't move it even an inch. That was a big blow to her. So she stood aside, indicating that it was Zen's turn to try. He walked up and touched the true barrier. He could feel a trace of the mysterious law power hidden within, but it wasn't any of the original laws. He thought for a moment before asking, this true barrier has the law of causality hidden within it, right? Saul nodded and said, this is a law of causality barrier created by the master. With your current ability, you can't penetrate it. If you don't want to waste time, I think you should just use your thunder token to go through. Zen smiled. Zen could take a shortcut by using the token, but he knew very well that a martial artist who preferred to take shortcuts wouldn't get anywhere. Sometimes, one had to take shortcuts if there was no other choice, and some other times, one had to learn to avoid taking shortcuts. Martial artists had to constantly test their own strength and challenge their limits. On the other hand, opportunistic people could temporarily take the lead by taking the shortcuts, but they would lose out in the end. Martial artists who relied purely on shortcuts would ultimately not be able to go far. So Zen wouldn't use the thunder token to walk through the true barrier unless he truly had no way to break it. Standing in front of the true barrier and looking at the pale yellow transparent wall, Zen took a deep breath and lit up the dragon scales within his body. The surging power of the dragon scales poured into Zen's body. He activated the power of 1,000 dragon scales. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. His body had begun to accommodate the power of 5,000 dragon scales once Zen had consolidated his cultivation. When he had just broken through to the life and death realm, the power of 5,000 dragon scales had almost caused his body to explode. This time, Zen was able to handle it even though he felt a little uncomfortable. Crack, crack, crack. Due to the influx of power into Zen's body, his joints began to produce explosive sounds. His body also started to expand and his body suddenly doubled in size. Darling, don't push yourself too much, Letitia said worriedly as she looked at what was happening. Aura was staring blankly at Zen, the aura erupting from his body rendering her breathless. There was no one in the eastern region who could compare to Zen. Aura knew that Zen had become very strong, but it was still beyond her imagination as to how strong he really was right now. Now that Zen was gathering his strength, his entire body had undergone a tremendous change. His aura had become invincible. If a martial artist like Kenneth had faced Zen, he probably would have turned pale and teetered. Zen had become unimaginably strong in just a few years' time. What did the future behold? What kind of a character would Zen grow up to become? A small place like the central region would not be able to restrain him. Aura pondered. She still couldn't fathom how strong Zen would become. A strong sense of crisis overcame her. She did not know that 2 months ago, when the old man Nameless had told Margaret about her falling out once Zen advanced further, Margaret had already taken the necessary measures. She had made a plan to improve her cultivation, and that was why she had gone to the Purple Power World to find a master for herself. The biggest problem was that Margaret had a special physique and already had a way to deal with the crisis. But what about Aura? What did she have to do to follow in Zen's steps? She suddenly remembered that when Zen had first entered the Cloud sect, she had argued with the old man in charge of the test to win over Zen. Now the boy had become such a powerful man she could only look up to. She felt sad as she thought this. Zen had returned and told her how he felt about her, but she could do nothing about it. She was like a puppet, unable to change anything. Aura was deep in thought, but Zen had already landed a punch. Powerful energy surged out, producing an intense airflow. Aura and Margaret wobbled on their feet as the currents moved around them. Letitia and Saul stood quietly on the spot and watched Zen's punch strike out. Boom! The punch landed on the true barrier, causing it to tremble. Cracks appeared on it, but they quickly narrowed and disappeared. Zen had failed in his attempt. Chapter 955, The Universe Spirit Tablet. Seeing this scene, Letitia curled up her lips and said to Saul, "It looks like this barrier cannot be opened at all." The power that Zen's terrifying punch released exceeded Letitia's expectations, but it still wasn't enough to break through the barrier. She started to wonder whether Saul was just trying to play a trick on them. Hearing Letitia's words, Saul looked indifferent and responded, "Zen can't break this barrier, but that doesn't mean others can't do so." If even Zen can't break through this barrier, who else can? Margaret asked indignantly. The three women had done all they could to defend Zen. Saul couldn't be bothered to argue with these women. He directly turned towards Zen and told him, "Since you've already tried brute force, you should use the token with the word, thunder, now. Like I said, with your current strength, you can't break through the true barrier." However, Zen laughed and remarked, "I don't need to use the token." After he finished these words, a pickaxe appeared in his hand. When Saul saw the pickaxe in Zen's hand, a hint of surprise finally appeared on his face. "The Black Star." Zen nodded. This time, he brandished the black star in his hand and without hesitation, ruthlessly smashed it at the true barrier. Clang! The true barrier shattered with a loud bang as soon as it was hit by the black star. The incomparably hard barrier collapsed like a paper under the attack of the black star. Then, Zen asked Saul, "You've been staying in the fairy palace all this while, so how come you know this pickaxe?" Saul slightly smiled and the surprise on his face faded away. He told Zen, "In this universe, numerous warriors have created their own ranking of magic weapons, but the most popular one is the Universe Spirit Tablet. After this Spirit Tablet was created, the various races from all over the world also created a copy of it. As soon as a supreme divine weapon is born, it is detected by the Spirit Tablet, and its name appears on it." The Universe Spirit Tablet? Zen suddenly raised his eyebrows. Saul nodded and continued, "If I remember correctly, as a supreme divine weapon, this pickaxe is most probably ranked in the top 900 places. The law of causality within the Black Star is at a very high level. But it is just a pickaxe after all, so it is not easy to bring its actual strength into play. If it was forged into a weapon like an axe or a sword, it might be able to find itself among the top 600 or 700 weapons of the universe." Hearing this ranking, Zen nodded his head. He knew very little about the situation of the upper world and was extremely curious about the Spirit Tablet. So he asked, "Are there over 10,000 weapons on the Universe Spirit Tablet? And are all of them supreme divine weapons?" However, Saul shook his head. The number of the supreme divine weapons is small in the universe. A small universe wouldn't be able to hold more than 10,000 supreme divine weapons. A small universe. Zen's face was filled with amazement. The universe as he knew of, encompassed 100,000 supreme worlds, and the scope of a supreme world was so vast that Zen found it hard to imagine. But Saul thought that the universe was too small. What did this man have in his mind? From his words, Zen was able to draw a conclusion. This universe seemed to have an end. What was at the end of the universe? And what existed beyond the universe? However, it was difficult for Zen to understand such a vast and complex matter right now. It also wasn't something that Zen needed to explore right now either. He still wanted to know more about the Spirit Tablet though. If a supreme divine weapon is forged, it is ranked in the top 3,000 on the Spirit Tablet. The top grade divine weapons are over 3,000th in the rankings. However, the top 100 weapons on the Universe Spirit Tablet are very special. In the future, when you fly into the upper world, you will naturally find everything there is to know about them. Moreover, I have not explored the Universe Spirit Tablet for a long time now. It is not made of cold stone. The weapons on it will constantly change according to the reaction of the Spirit Tablet. After so many years, the black star which can only be used for digging things has probably fallen out of the top 1,000, Saul continued. Zen nodded his head in silence. The black star was not a weapon for Zen, but it still came in very useful sometimes. Well, in any case, I have used the black star to break the true barrier. Now, take me to the true path. Saul nodded. Follow me. Under Saul's lead, Zen and the three women continued to move forwards. Just like what Immortal Mist had said, this fairy palace was actually much bigger than what Zen had imagined. After walking for a while, Zen saw the surrounding scenery gradually change. The high walls could no longer be seen and their surroundings were all open spaces now. There was a path with all kinds of strange flowers and plants glowing on both sides. The path was just a common ridge of the fields in a small village. However, this path was so thin that only one person could walk on it at a time. It stretched all the way to the far end without any visible end to it. Here we are, Saul said simply. Seeing the small ridge of the fields, Zen, Letitia, Aura, and even Margaret, who was usually nonchalant, had strange looks on their faces. Is this really the true path? Zen could not help asking. Saul nodded his head. Yes, there are a total of 6 stages to this true path. And every time you manage to pass through a stage, you can get a token. However, it would be best if you just challenge the first stage right now. I am not even sure you can pass that at your current level of strength. It's just a thin ridge of the fields, why is it difficult to walk through? Margaret smiled. You can try for yourself, Saul replied flatly after hearing Margaret. Although he was a bit dull, he was still a living soul after all. Alright, I'll give it a try. Margaret finished speaking and was just about to step onto the ridge of the fields, when a strong hand pulled her back. It was Zen. He asked Saul, will our lives be in danger if we walk on the true path? The true path isn't a magic array, and all challenges that you will face are real, so yes. There is a risk associated with it. Generally speaking, the true path is passable enough for warriors at the Soul Sea realm or above. Of course, there are a few outstanding life and death realm warriors who can walk on it. However, even such exceptional life and death realm warriors can only walk through the first stage, Saul explained. Hearing this, Zen immediately pulled back Margaret several more steps. Fortunately, he was able to grab hold of her. With Margaret's current strength, she wouldn't have been able to last on the true path. Saul's words made Letitia and the others worried. The three women did not want Zen to risk his life for this endeavor. Aura could not hold it and tried to stop him. Zen, if it's too dangerous, you can wait and go back this time. You can come here and give it a try after your cultivation base improves and reaches a higher level. Letitia also frowned and nodded her head. He had just broken through and reached the life and death realm. It was not wise to recklessly face such dangerous challenges for the time being. Zen stared at the ridge of the field which was extending almost into the horizon. After pondering over it for a while, he remembered that the mysterious old man, whose name he still didn't know, had given him a pill on his wedding day. At that time, the pill didn't seem to have any effect at all. However, in the following days, Zen was surprised to discover that a miraculous change had occurred inside his body. The life vitality that was supposed to gradually solidify now seemed to be liquefying, and he could feel that his cultivation base had increased several times faster than before. Although the old man didn't consider the pill to be something valuable, Zen was clear that this pill had awakened its intelligence, and it could even escape and attack people. Besides, its strength was also very powerful. No matter what the case was, the pill's effects were far beyond Zen's imagination. For now, all he knew was that his cultivating speed had increased greatly. Although he had spent most of the past 2 months with Letitia and Margaret, and had only spent a few days cultivating, Zen could faintly feel that his cultivation base had reached its limit. He thought that he would have to accept the second small heavenly tribulation and advance to the second level of the life and death realm pretty soon. With Zen's current strength, it would not be difficult for him to return to the eastern region from the central region and enter the fairy palace. Although what Letitia said made sense, Zen still shook his head. He wanted to try now. Since we've already come here all the way, how can I give up so easily? Saul smiled slightly. I know you won't give up so easily, but I still have to remind you. Your true strength is comparable to that of a Soul Sea Realm warrior, so yeah, there is a chance that you might be able to break through the first stage of the true path. As long as you can get a token, that's not too bad. You can even open the weapon refining workshop or a library with the token, which would let you gain endless benefits. So I suggest you should give it a try. Margaret asked in an annoyed tone, what if Zen is injured? Are you responsible for that? Saul just ignored her words. He could not be bothered to argue with her. Chapter 956, Dark and Light Energies. Zen knew that the girls were worried about him. So he looked at them, assuring them with confidence, trust me. I'll be okay. The girls showed concerns of varying degrees, but since Zen had already made his decision, how could they possibly interfere? Moreover, it was what the world was like. In the world of martial artists, except for Margaret who had grown up well protected, everyone had to encounter dangerous situations on their path of pursuing martial arts. Aura had also experienced a few life and death situations. And Zen had saved Letitia from the jaws of death not long ago. Once Zen had set foot on the true path, Letitia said, Zen has a great destiny, and I believe he will pass successfully. Letitia hadn't gone overseas with Zen and she had no idea what kind of danger Zen had encountered during his several trips. But she was very confident about Zen's strength and luck. Just after Zen had set foot on the true path, mists began to rise from either side of this ridge. There were 2 kinds of mists, each of a different color. The mist on Zen's left was black, while the mist on his right was white. These mists are very strange, Zen muttered, a strange feeling overcoming him at the sight of these mists. He felt like they could turn into everything in the world. Just as a trace of doubt arose in Zen's heart, Saul's voice floated into his ears, these are dark and light energies. The first owner of the fairy palace had worked them out. You need to be careful. At the beginning of heaven and earth, everything was in primordial chaos. It was infinity. This infinity gave birth to the supreme ultimate that then produced 2 modes. The 2 modes represented 2 contrary forces and they generated the 4 images. The 4 images included east, south, west and north and the 4 images gave birth to the 8 diagrams. The 8 diagrams multiplied to become 64 diagrams and they continued to multiply themselves. There was no end to it. If the dark and light energies continued to develop, it was likely that they would lead to the origin of the entire world. Zen was unable to figure out the mysteries within them. But he didn't need to know anything about them at the current stage. What he needed to do was to continuously advance on this true path. As he thought this, Zen sped up and shot forward like a shuttle. The dark and light energies turned into strange flowers and plants as they rushed towards Zen. Zen's expression did not change and a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand. He swung the long sword to the left and unleashed sharp sword intense. He then spun the sword to the right and grasped the sword with one hand. The sword intense soon wrapped around Zen to protect him. Rays of light from the sharp sword whirled in the air, and in an instant, the strange flowers and plants formed by the dark and light energies were ground to dust. They returned to their original forms and became black and white mists, before condensing into different strange plants that continued to attack Zen. They are not difficult to deal with, Zen muttered, dropping his guard. He increased his speed tremendously with the protection of the sword intense. As he flew forward, he turned to look back and found that everything behind him had actually disappeared. Margaret, Letitia, and Aura were shrouded in the black and white mists. He traversed the narrow path alone, and loneliness suddenly arose in his heart. As Zen continued to charge forward, the things that the dark and night energies transformed into varied. This time, they transformed into a large number of small insects of different species, of which Zen could recognize only a few, like butterflies, dragonflies, and beetles. Most of these insects were strange to look and they had hateful countenances. The sword intense whirled around and smashed the insects into pulp and powder. The insects multiplied in size as more and more of them swarmed out. Some were even the size of a fist. The thick shells covering their bodies were so hard that Zen had to put in a lot of effort to cut them to pieces even with his top-grade sacred weapon. The noise of the sword intense colliding with the shells filled the place. But they were still unable to stop Zen despite there being so many of them. His speed only increased. As he dashed forward, these insects gradually disappeared and were replaced by scores of reptiles like lizards and snakes. Zen was suddenly struck by a thought. This true path, it seems to have been arranged in accordance with the evolution of living beings. Creatures throughout the universe had not appeared out of thin air. Every species came into existence, reproduced and gave birth to new generations. Through constant evolution, they would erase their weak points, improve on their strengths, and become stronger. It was the survival of the fittest in natural selection. A lot of the creatures that came at Zen were foreign to him. Some had probably already become extinct in this world, while some others had evolved into even more powerful races. But why is the true path set up like this? Zen wondered. Swish, swish, on both sides of the true path, dark and light energies kept transforming into different colored reptiles of different sizes, and continued to move towards Zen. Just like the insects and plants, these low-level creatures posed no threat to Zen. He continued to move as fast as he could. But the moment he had walked past this area, the difficulty of advancing on the true path suddenly increased. The dark and light energies began to transform into ferocious beasts. There were lions, tigers, leopards, mastiffs, and so many more that Zen couldn't even recognize. Kill, but Zen remained calm. Any ferocious beast that dared approach him would be easily killed. Once Zen had killed all these ferocious beasts, primates like monkeys, gorillas, baboons, and a few human-like beings began to appear on the true path. The attacks from these primates were even weaker than those from the ferocious beasts. They held sticks in their hands, and threw stones at Zen. They even used fire. It was extremely primitive, but Zen was clear that all human-like creatures like the ogres, demon knight members, and the giants could develop into what they were today only because of the wisdom they had activated in the ancient time. But who had bestowed such wisdom to them? He had no idea. All he knew was that he had to continue killing them. The primates' attacks were futile. They weren't able to harm Zen at all. Under the frenzied slaughter, these primates gradually disappeared. But after that, more human-like beings appeared one after another. They were taller. Humans, but they don't look exactly like humans. These creatures looked very similar to humans, but when Zen looked closer, he knew it was not the case. They were taller than humans, and their every muscle and bone was perfectly in position. They had sharp ears like those of the demon knight. Their pupils and skin resembled those of the ogres. They also had dark green scales covering their back, and although these scales weren't very beautiful, they could protect them from attacks they couldn't see. In addition to their strength, Zen could feel a perfect aura emanating from their bodies. What kind of race was this? Why was there such a perfect race? Zen looked at them curiously. Zen had previously considered the demon knight to be the most perfect race. They were born nature creatures, with pure and flawless bodies. But they also had some drawbacks. They were quite weak at reproduction and increasing their population. There were many talents in their race, but their population was still small and the number of powerful masters and talents they had was far smaller than that in the human race. Each race had their own advantages and disadvantages. The creatures standing in front of Zen made him feel strange. This race seemed to be a perfect combination of all the strong points of many different races. But why hadn't Zen heard of this race before? Those perfect creatures charged towards Zen, taking advantage of the time he was spending pondering over his doubts. They seemed to have grasped some crucial battle techniques as they directly attacked Zen's vitals. Humph! Zen grunted but recovered to throw a punch towards one of them. He didn't use the power of the dragon scales. He was still in the early stage of the true path, so he thought he didn't need a lot of strength. Zen was confident that he could bring a person down with one punch. But as Zen's punch was about to hit him, the one standing in the lead suddenly curled up, reducing the impact he had to suffer. His bones began to twist in an astonishing way that no normal person could have done. He looked miserable as he rolled on the ground in pain. His shattered body began to recover a while later. Zen was shocked as he saw this. The people of this race gave Zen the impression that they were perfect beings, but they had never cultivated martial arts. Even though their bodies were pure, they were only nature creatures. The punch that Zen had thrown was very powerful. Even a warrior at the internal elixir realm would get killed immediately. A nature creature was no match at all. Yet this guy had offset more than half the power in Zen's strike by relying on his flexible body. More surprisingly, he had actually managed to get to his feet unscathed. How did he do it? Chapter 957, The Sacred Race. Zen was a life and death realm warrior, so he knew he could easily deal with these creatures if he really wanted to. But the way they were able to disperse the force from his attack with their bodies just shocked him. To put it into perspective, the Zen from the past, who was also a nature creature, would never have survived a single punch from the present Zen now. However, this creature had managed to resolve Zen's strength. Although it seemed hard for him and he might have been severely injured, he was still able to move around smoothly. Whoosh, 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 they pounced towards Zen one by one, none of them having practiced any cultivation method but still surviving Zen's fists. Bang, 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 Zen purposefully did not increase his strength and these creatures were all sent flying by him. However, they all stood up from the ground and revealed faint smiles on their faces. Do these guys have intelligence? Or did the person who set up this true path deliberately arrange them this way? The creatures were quick to come at him again, but this time, Zen did not pull his punches. Puff, 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 he had activated the forceful energy within his body and launched a series of formidable attacks upon those who came at him. Anybody that got close was immediately smashed into a bloody pulp by his punch. The sight of the bodies exploding surprised him, not because of the gore, but because of the color of the blood that burst from the inside. Golden blood. As far as he knew, only those belonging to the celestial position race had golden blood. Zen, as an outsider who was recognized and became a member, had yet to have his blood changed, but the fact remained that golden blood was the signature of the elite race. There must be a connection. His punches smashed the creatures into a pulpy, golden blood shower that then dispersed and transformed once again into dark and light energies. These energies coalesced and reformed into solid, human-shaped creatures that once again charged at Zen. This time, he noticed that the creatures had grown exponentially faster and stronger. Forceful energy, he remarked in shock when he felt it emanate from the creatures that were now rushing towards him. However, there was another peculiar thing, the way they moved seemed very similar to his own style. A sudden realization popped in his head, they were copying him. Zen couldn't help but feel angry at this observation. I'll destroy you all from the inside out. A bit of forceful energy wasn't going to stop Zen from squashing these nature creatures. Zen took a deep breath and began to circulate the life vitality in his body, allowing it to surge into higher levels. But, the moment he tried increasing his strength, the creatures also seemed to do the same. Nature level, illuminating soul realm, virtual tribulation realm, life and death realm. The suddenness of this increase in power stunned Zen and he finally started to feel the pressure catch up to him. Bang! Several creatures charged at him simultaneously. There was no room to dodge since the true path was only enough for one person, which forced Zen to retreat a few steps. This was the moment he realized that he shouldn't have wasted his time fighting with these creatures. The goal was to pass the true path and there were probably still many stages he would have to undergo. There was no point in wasting both his time and strength here. Finally, having clarified his goal, Zen activated the power of the dragon scales and used it to shatter his enemies. As they fell, he summoned his forceful energy and gathered his life vitality at the same time. Cloud chasing skill. The wind traveling skill he learned from Brianna truly came handy this time. It was good that, despite having only grasped the first layer of the wind law, he had already mastered the technique after many hours of practice when he got back in Central Region. Zen borrowed the power of the winds and used it to glide forward uninhibitedly. With the wind under his control, Zen was able to go through and leave the peculiar creatures behind him. However, that was from his perspective. Saul, Letitia, and the two other girls both saw something else. Despite Zen, himself, feeling as if he was getting away, the others only saw him make running postures but did not move an inch at all. Zen seemed to have discovered something. He's good for now but the next bit will be difficult, Saul said. His life vitality had greatly increased his speed but Zen soon realized that the creatures, formed by both dark and light energies, also became faster as well. Zen's eyes suddenly widened in realization, life vitality. They're using life vitality. They saw him use it and now, they had suddenly also gotten the ability to use life vitality. It didn't help that all their cultivation bases had been raised to the first level of the life and death realm, the same as Zen. What was worse was that they were all much stronger than ordinary warriors. As nature creatures, they were already able to withstand Zen's attacks, which meant that they were pretty powerful than all races Zen had encountered. He truly felt the pressure pounding in his veins now. They were strong but it was fortunate that Zen realized he didn't have to waste time and energy fighting them. It wasn't worth it. The only thing he needed to do was to sprint forward and get through this path. He'd be okay as long as he maintained the distance between them. However, this distance was quickly diminishing. Zen felt the strong wind law behind him. Couple this with a few creatures also using the space law to travel through space, and it was only a matter of time before the gap was closed. Boom! The explosion and smell of slightly singed hair told him that the creatures just attempted to launch a formidable pillar of fire law towards him. Law powers, they were using law powers. He had only used the wind law earlier but these creatures were now using all kinds of original law, trying to get to him. Are they also proficient in all kinds of original law? He couldn't help but wonder to himself. The sacred race is the creator of all the laws, he heard Saul's voice reverberate through the path. The members of this race can automatically comprehend all the laws shortly after being born. Once you use a law power, then they will use every kind to fight you. It was at this moment that Zen felt his movement slow down. The time law, the sacred race, I've never heard of them, he exclaimed grumpily. The time law had made him sluggish so he quickly had to apply it to himself to cancel the effects and help him speed away once again. Had he known this before, Zen would have given up fighting with them and just used his physical strength. What kind of race are they? This race is the origin of all primates. The most perfect race. The cyan dragon, who had been silent all this time, answered in his head. The number of races classified as primates was extremely large. There were monkeys, gorillas, baboons, humans, ogres, the demon knight race, etc. Vicious beasts, legendary beasts, super legendary beasts, and true spirits, after gaining enough wisdom and having enough strength to reach the morphing stage, would usually take on the shape of a human. The cyan dragon, for example, had morphed into a human named Josh in the past. Formidable creatures like him usually had a human form counterpart. But those races actually didn't transform themselves into humans. The cyan dragon's explanation quickly cleared things up for Zen, who now understood that the transformations were not based on humans but on a more powerful race which looked quite similar to humans, the sacred race. But that was not all. All races, be it human, demon knight, ogre, or whatever, all inherited some kind of unique characteristic from this primordial sacred race that caused them to choose different paths and adopt different systems of cultivation. It was the demon knight who resembled the sacred race the most. Newly born demon knight infants were already nature creatures, which was an unrivaled advantage over other races. However, there was a cost to this inborn advantage. The demon knight race was known to have more females than males, which made their reproduction rate extremely low. I understand it now, Zen said. However, another thought crossed his mind. If they were so perfect, then why had he not heard of them before? Why were there no traces of them? Did they all just disappear? He was about to ask the cyan dragon for his wisdom, but a sudden flurry of attacks rained down upon him by the creatures. There was no way he was allowing himself to get hit given his current strength. The only thing Zen could do was to continue running in the hopes of dodging their attacks. Unfortunately, the creatures coming for him only seemed to increase both in number and power. Whoosh, crack, zoom, all sorts of law power attacks came at him, wind blades, fire swords, thunder strikes. Saul shook his head at the sight. Zen won't be able to take it much longer. Chapter 958, The Token of Mountain. Letitia's fist suddenly became clenched when she heard Saul's indifferent words. An impossibly large number of life and death realm creatures had surrounded Zen and were attacking him. The worst part was that every single one of these creatures was proficient in all sorts of law power. This was perhaps the biggest challenge for Zen. Aura put her hands over her chest and closed her eyes. She knew that she could not change or stop anything now and could only silently pray in her heart. As for Margaret, she didn't care about rules and took a step forward, raising her hand. "What are you doing?" Saul asked indifferently. "I am going to break the true path." Margaret couldn't be bothered to reason with others. She did not have Letitia's rationality and cared only about Zen's safety. However, before she could make her move, Saul piped up, "Your sky-purple body is indeed powerful, but you will not be able to activate the space nodes in here." Margaret was totally unwilling to listen to this guy. He was kind of a jerk. With a slight movement of her finger, she tried to communicate with the huge swords in the purple power world. Her hands circled the area a few times, but there was no response from her surroundings, nor were there any fluctuations. It was just as Saul had said, she could not communicate with the purple power world from this place at all. It was as if the place was magically shielded. She was at a loss for what to do now. Seeing Zen constantly struggling in the midst of so many kinds of law powers, she was really worried and scared. No longer able to bear it, she was about to step forward and jump onto the true path. "What are you doing?" Letitia shouted coldly and grabbed onto Margaret. If Margaret had jumped onto the true path before Zen, she wouldn't have been in too much danger since the challenge would have been at lower level. But now, those warriors who had been conjured up by the true path were all at the life and death realm. How could she hope to fight against them? "But Zen," Margaret said with a face full of worry. To be frank, Margaret was indeed smarter than Letitia in certain aspects, such as speculating on Zen's thoughts. Her EQ was also higher than Letitia's, but in the field of cultivation, she was far from Letitia as she could be. Letitia knew that Margaret would be simply courting death if she jumped onto the true path now. Fortunately, since Margaret's strength was far inferior to Letitia's, no matter how hard she struggled, she could not escape Letitia's control. At that moment, Aura chimed in calmly, "Don't worry." Margaret looked at Aura and snorted, "You're not worried about Zen's life at all, are you?" "It's not like that." Aura shook her head. "I believe in Zen. I know that he has the strength to fight back and win." Letitia also nodded. "Zen's limits and powers are far more than what they seem. Don't listen to this idiot." With that, she pointed at Saul. The three women did not have a good impression of Saul. However, it was obvious that the guy did not care about that at all. He was busy watching Zen's every move as indifferently as if he didn't care about his life at all. Boom! The warriors had been building up their law powers and attacked Zen altogether. But the moment the various kinds of law powers struck Zen, intense rays of light burst out. The three women's hands clenched together, their faces full of nervousness and mouths open in shock. After the light faded away, Zen was still standing there, his body completely intact. However, his clothes had been destroyed by the energy. What? This guy seems to have transferred the power that hit him somewhere else. Saul's face once again revealed an expression of surprise. As for Margaret and Aura, they both let out a sigh of relief with ecstatic smiles on their faces. They did not care about the process, nor did they want to know how Zen had survived the attack. What they cared about was that Zen seemed all right and would live to fight another day. Letitia's eyes were also filled with shock. "How did he do that?" she asked curiously. "For the time being, even I can't tell. He seems to have fused with some kind of will. A will usually belongs to some treasure, and he might have transferred the power to that treasure," Saul tried to explain. Even he was unable to figure out that Zen had fused with the will of the entire great world. He had just transferred the power he had received to the magnetic sacred mountain. The attacks from the mighty warriors were simply unable to break the mountain. Relying on this means, Zen once again rushed forward. Since he knew that they could not hurt him, he let those warriors use all sorts of methods, but he himself did not stop at all. Not long after, he felt the warriors falling behind and the road ahead gradually brightening up. Moreover, he saw that Saul and the three women were standing right in front of him. When Zen had set foot on the true path, these four people had been right behind him. However, he hadn't thought that the end of the road would actually be the beginning of it, which surprised him a bit. Whoosh! Zen jumped up and out of the true path. He smiled at Saul and asked, "Did I pass the test?" "You passed the first stage," Saul answered in his usual indifferent tone. "What about the token?" Zen asked. Saul pointed behind Zen. The latter turned his head around, and saw that the dark and light energies on the fields were slowly drifting. Eventually, they congealed. At the same time, the entire fields disappeared, and a token slowly descended from the sky. The three women also raised their heads and looked at it. Letitia said cheerfully, "It's a token of water." A token carved with the word, water, slowly floated down and dropped into Zen's outstretched hand. He looked at it and heard Saul say, "With that token in your possession, you will be able to enter the library and read all the books within it." The library. Zen's eyebrows shot up. Nothing inside this fairy palace was insignificant. But for Zen at his current level of cultivation, other parts of the palace might not be that important, but the library was definitely an indispensable item. "You are much stronger than I have imagined. Even a powerful warrior at the Soul Sea realm wouldn't have survived under the siege of so many life and death realm warriors. They were from the sacred race. However, you seem to have transferred the attacks you received onto some treasure. If you have confidence in that treasure, you can also start challenging the second stage of the true path now," Saul encouraged. Saul thought that Zen possessed some kind of treasure, but actually such a thing did not exist. Of course, he could also view the entire great world as Zen's treasure. The capacity of a great world was terrifying. Even though some of the strongest warriors of the universe could destroy every single creature of the central region, it was impossible for them to destroy an entire great world. Of course, Zen couldn't let the great world suffer from too many strong attacks. Last time, in order to resist the attack of the Black Eye, Zen had caused almost every single normal mountain in the great world to be destroyed. This time, he had transferred the attacks he had received to the magnetic sacred mountain. "Sure, I'd like to," Zen replied with a smile. Saul nodded his head. The fog below dispersed and the true path was once again opened up in front of Zen. "Zen, the second stage is even more difficult than the first one, so you should be careful," Saul told him. "But since you can transfer the attacks you receive, so as long as your treasure can bear those attacks, there shouldn't be too much danger for you." Thus, Zen once again rushed onto the true path without any hesitation. Now, Margaret turned her head and smiled at Aura. "All right, you can turn around now." Only then did Aura turn around and look at the true path. Her face was still filled with shyness and her cheeks were crimson. Zen's clothes were gone, so she had turned her head away shyly. As for Letitia and Margaret, they were naturally not shy. After all, they had already had sex with him. The second stage of the test took an hour, and the strength of the sacred race warriors also rose several notches level. Although they still did not use any cultivation methods, the warriors created by the dark and light energies were all at the Soul Sea realm. Even the law powers they had grasped had risen to the third or fourth layer. Fortunately, these guys did not know how to unleash domains. Once again, Zen merely transferred the attacks from these warriors to the magnetic sacred mountain and the mountain simply absorbed all the attacks. However, Zen was focused on dashing forward on the true path instead of fighting, and didn't have the time to investigate the condition of the magnetic sacred mountain. Even though it was impervious to swords and spears and such weapons, there was a limit to the amount of strength it could endure. Just how terrifying was the power contained within the continuous attacks of dozens of powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm? Could it withstand that? In reality, the majority of the magnetic sacred mountain was located at the bottom of the sea. There was already a shallow crack in it, and that crack was constantly expanding. Done, Zen had passed the second stage of the true path. However, it was only now that he saw Aura's face blushing, and she suddenly turned around. He chuckled as he took out a set of clothes from his space ring and put them on. Following the descent of the vast fog, another token appeared in the sky. This time, it was a token of mountain. "What's the use of this token?" Zen asked curiously. When Saul saw that Zen had obtained this token, a trace of happiness appeared on his face. "With this token, you can carry the fairy palace around with you." Chapter 959, A Prison. Saul's body had been created by the first owner of the fairy palace. He wouldn't go through the 5 aging processes, and his body would not break. In other words, even if he wanted to kill himself, he wouldn't be able to do so. His soul was tightly sealed within, making it impossible for him to disperse his own soul. For Saul, guarding the fairy palace was a rather boring task. Dying was an extravagant hope for him. If only someone stayed in the fairy palace, it would be so good for him. All the previous owners had attempted to take control of the fairy palace, but all of them had failed. Saul had even hoped for the return of Immortal Mist, but in the end he also died because of the 5 aging processes. Now, Zen was slowly gaining control of the fairy palace. Not only had he obtained the token of water, he had even managed to get the token of mountain. "Carry the fairy palace around with me. Is the fairy palace movable?" Zen asked. Saul nodded. The token of mountain is the most special one of the 6 tokens. It is the projection of this fairy palace, and is equivalent to the entrance. You can regard it as the fairy palace itself. As long as you have the token, you can return to the fairy palace at any time you want. It seemed like Saul was in a good mood. You can also treat the fairy palace as this woman's sky-purple body and the token is a space node, he explained, pointing at Margaret. So that's how it is, Zen remarked. This way, if he wanted to return to the fairy palace in the future, he wouldn't need to travel tens of thousands of miles to get to the eastern region. He could do so with the token of mountain in his hand. Do you want to continue? Saul asked. Zen had already obtained 2 tokens in a short period of time, but this time he chose to give up. In the next stage of the test, a large group of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors would probably appear. Although Zen could completely transfer all the attacks faced by him, the problem was that the magnetic sacred mountain also had a limit to its carrying capacity. If a large group of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors used the 5th layer of any original law, their power would become unimaginably strong. If the magnetic sacred mountain was destroyed, the overflowing power would probably damage the foundation of the entire great world. Zen was not willing to take this risk. Besides, now that he had the token of mountain, he could wait for his strength to increase and then return to the fairy palace in the future to obtain the other tokens. He still had the token of water in his hand. He smiled and said, "Then, can we head to the library now?" "No problem," Saul said with a nod. Zen's eyes flashed, and he asked, "Can others also enter?" He was naturally referring to Letitia and the others. Possessing any token is equivalent to being the owner of the fairy palace. It's up to you to decide whether or not they can enter the library, Saul said. Got it. Previously, although Zen was considered to be the owner of the fairy palace, he couldn't control anything. The token of wind was at most just a ticket into the fairy palace, and the token of thunder gave him the right to challenge the true path. Now that he had the tokens of water and mountain, his mastery over the fairy palace was growing more and more. Someday, he would be able to acquire the other 4 tokens, and even the tokens of heaven and earth. So everyone turned around and began to walk back. However, when they were halfway there, a violent and savage aura suddenly erupted from the depths of the fairy palace. Roar! At the same time, a strange cry was heard. Even though it was at a great distance, the vicious aura was abnormally terrifying. Zen's face fell while Letitia's was as pale as a sheet. As for Margaret and Aura, they fainted on the spot. What is this? Zen asked Saul as he helped Aura up while Letitia went to support Margaret. The evil aura was not released from the front. Moreover, it was quite far from Zen. However, it shocked and terrified him. One can imagine just how dangerous that thing must be. Saul's expression changed. He then said, "Looks like someone is getting impatient." "Where did that sound come from?" Zen asked. "The dog house," Saul replied simply. "Zen, now that you've obtained the token of water, you can go to the library yourself. I'll just go take a look inside now." Not waiting for Zen's answer, Saul flew straight to the depths of the fairy palace. There was an exquisite backyard in the depths of the fairy palace. And a ferocious beast was tied with a chain in a corner of the backyard. The beast was on the ground, not moving at all. Saul walked towards the beast expressionlessly and asked, "What are you so anxious about?" Roar! The beast's voice was softer this time, but its head was still facing the deep pit. "Are the guys in the prison being naughty again?" Saul walked towards the deep pit. In it was a row of fences, and underneath these fences was absolute darkness. Saul yelled into the pit, "You've endured so many years. Why are you being so impatient now?" There was no answer. Saul continued to speak. "The young man's talent is very strong, and his luck is not bad either. He has actually obtained 4 tokens. The important thing is that he has the tokens of mountain and water. In the future, he might even be able to get the tokens of heaven and earth." There was pin-drop silence in the deep pit. "I know you're not optimistic, but this time it might really be different. You have already waited for so many years. Believe me, you will only have to wait for 1,000 years at the most. For you, this amount of time is nothing. Just be a little more patient," said Saul, trying to encourage them. Seeing that there was no response, Saul was ready to leave. However, just as he turned away, he heard a voice from the pit saying, "Then call him in. I'll teach him. I promise it won't take 1,000 years. 100 years is enough. After that, he will be the strongest warrior in the whole universe. He will beat the trash out of those supreme lords." Saul didn't turn back around, he just stood there. He shook his head and said, "Master's rules cannot be broken. If he can't obtain the tokens of heaven and earth, then he can't enter this place." With that, he left the backyard. A middle-aged man with long, Straggly hair was sitting next to the fences in the deep pit. He looked up indifferently and muttered, "Even if I have to wait for 100 million years, I won't complain. 1,000 years is nothing. But the problem is, I'm afraid the monsters in the lower level of the prison can't wait any longer." How could Zen have known what was going on? He and Letitia revived Margaret and Aura, and gave them some pills to calm themselves. Only then did they head towards the library. Naturally, the gate to the library was inordinately tall. Zen raised his head, but it was hard to see the top of the door frame. "Can I open the gate by just using the token of water?" Zen took out the token of water, and the moment he did so, a golden light flashed from the top to the bottom of the gate. With a muffled sound, the entire gate revealed a crack. Zen sprang into action and attempted to push open the gate. The gate looked as tall as a mountain, and Zen thought that it would take much effort on his part to push open the gate. However, the gate opened just with a light touch, and the scent of books wafted up his nose. Books don't have a natural fragrance of their own. Surely the books in the library must be made from special wood pulp. Countless years later, the natural fragrance was still intact. It was an intoxicating smell. "Let's go." Zen smiled at Letitia. He was the first to enter the library. Letitia, Margaret, and Aura followed closely behind. Even after being shut for countless years, the library was still free from dust. In front of Zen stood bookshelves that were comparable to small mountains. As for the books on these bookshelves, each of them was 30 feet tall and 20 feet wide. "How can I read them?" Zen looked miserable when he saw such huge books. Chapter 960, The Chaotic Storm Chronicle. This was really depressing. The 2 stages of the true path hadn't been easy, and now, when he had finally entered the library, how could he return empty-handed? Zen leapt forward and jumped onto a bookshelf in the first row. The covers of every single book on this shelf were made of some kind of metal. They were extremely cold and tough, and the books themselves were enormously heavy. Although Zen couldn't identify the materials of the pages inside, he was sure that they were more than strong enough to be used in weapon refining. He grabbed the side of a huge book and exerted all the strength he had in his body. However, the book did not even budge a single inch. "Is this book that heavy?" Zen exclaimed, as his expression suddenly changed. This was an impossibility. When his power exploded out, it was enough to tear apart mountains and the earth itself. However, he hadn't expected the book to be this heavy. Zen had already been proud of his strength, but now he couldn't even lift a book. A look of unwillingness and irritation appeared on his face. This time, the force of the dragon scales within his body suddenly erupted out, and he used every ounce of his strength to grab onto a corner of the book. Finally, he managed to pull it off the bookshelf. The 3 women were still looking up when they suddenly saw a book that was as big as a house crashing down towards them. Their faces also revealed astonishment. On the other hand, Zen's expression changed drastically as he roared, "Dodge it quickly! Get out of the way!" The weight of the book was unknown, but Zen reckoned that it was no lighter than a mountain range. It was almost equivalent to the combined weight of 23 mountains, and if the 3 women were to be hit by it, even Letitia would not be able to survive such an onslaught. Margaret and Aura were even weaker than her, so they had to get out of the way. Fortunately, Letitia's reactions were extremely fast. She gently reached out her hands, grabbed both Margaret and Aura and retreated quickly to a side. The moment the 3 women got clear of the zone, the huge book directly fell on the spot where they had been standing. It was unknown what material was used to make the floor. But what was astonishing was that even when such a heavy book smashed down on it, not even a crack appeared. It was as though an ordinary book had been thrown to the floor. Zen didn't know just how many years it had been since this fairy palace had come into existence. If it was built using ordinary stones, how could it have withstood the endless years of erosion? It would have already turned into ashes if that were the case. Any sort of material that could withstand the corrosion of time was no ordinary thing. Zen leapt down and turned towards the women with a helpless smile and an apologetic look on his face. Letitia glared at Zen, clearly blaming him for his reckless actions. However, to be honest, Zen already knew that Letitia was capable of saving the other 2 women. Otherwise, he would have used the time law to save the 3 of them. After taking the book off the shelf, Zen walked towards the edge of the enormous book and flipped its cover open. It was no mean task. Though it was only a cover, yet it weighed as much as a mountain. The moment Zen flipped open the large book, he saw that rows upon rows of faint golden words were beginning to appear on the first page. When Zen initially saw these words, his eyes lit up. Each of these words were giving out an invisible pressure. They looked like twisted runes painted by some newcomer, but he understood that these runes were not divine textures but something else entirely. After he stared at the large book for a while, a helpless smile appeared on his face. I don't understand these words. The three women had surrounded Zen and the book. If even with Zen's experience, he couldn't understand the words that had sprung up, how could they hope to do so? It hadn't been easy for him to obtain the token of water, but now, he was unable to read a single word in here. Thus, Zen was somewhat dejected. However, after some thought, he felt that it was normal. After all, with the development of civilization, numerous different cultures had evolved, and almost every civilization had come up with their own language. In fact, Zen was sure that these words were from some language he hadn't even heard of. And that was okay. No matter how powerful a warrior was, he wouldn't be able to understand every single language. However, at that moment, a large book that was lying alone on another shelf opened up by itself. Smoke rose up from inside it, and from within the smoke, an amiable old man slowly appeared. After collecting his wits, the man started to walk in Zen's direction. As he walked, the smoke dissipated, giving the people beholding the old man's presence the feeling of a transcendent being, as if he was riding on clouds. The old man looked like an immortal to Zen and the three women. Young man, you shouldn't have opened the book. I can see that you don't even know any of the words, the old man reprimanded, shaking his head. Zen's face was filled with curiosity as he asked, was the method I used wrong? The old man nodded before saying, close the book. Let me teach you how to really open it. Since he wanted to learn its secrets, Zen followed his instructions and closed the book. He then asked, who are you? By that time, Saul had already rushed over. Upon hearing Zen's words, he answered for the old man, you can just call him Immortal Book. He is responsible for managing this library. After he finished speaking, Saul smiled and said to the old man, hey there. It's been so many years since we last met. Immortal Book glanced at Saul, and snorted, as if he was extremely dissatisfied with the latter. That's because it's been so many years since the library itself was opened. Master entrusted the fairy palace to you, yet you seem so irresponsible. Saul had a helpless look on his face. It was not that he had not wanted to open the library, it was just that the previous owners of the fairy palace had sucked. The second owner was someone who had disappeared even before activating the true path. As for the third one, which was Immortal Mist himself, although he had activated the true path and obtained the token of thunder, he hadn't even passed through the first stage of the true path. Immortal Book seemed to be too lazy to argue with Saul. He was responsible for the library, and he would serve those who entered the library. He walked up to Zen and told him in a friendly manner, wealth and beauty can be gained through diligent study. In this library, each book has its own universe. Take a look. Then, he pointed a finger at the book, and a golden pattern, spiral in shape and endless in beauty, appeared on the cover of the book. The old man now said slowly, inject your perception into it, and you will be able to read this book. It is called the Chaotic Storm Chronicle, and it recorded what our master experienced when he traveled in endless chaos. You might learn quite a lot of things in here. Hearing this, Zen did as Immortal Book had said and poured his perception into the golden pattern. The moment he did that, a huge ball of light suddenly appeared inside his mind, as if what was inside the book was now taking place in his mind. As the light slowly dissipated, everything in his surroundings started to float rapidly. A completely strange world appeared in his mind. Standing in the air, Zen looked around with his eyes filled with shock. Is this the world recorded in the Chaotic Storm Chronicle? The world in this book was in complete chaos. It was difficult for Zen to even describe the kind of space he was looking at. It was not an absolute darkness, since there were faint rays of light coming in from the surroundings. However, it was enveloped by layers of gray mist, and everywhere was diffused a black and white colored fog. Zen had seen this kind of fog before on the true path. It was formed by the dark and light energies. Boom! A massive bolt of lightning struck through the chaos out of nowhere. I can't comprehend the law power that is contained within this lightning. Zen cried. The thunder law within the lightning was in a perfect and complete state, and Zen was unable to comprehend it. Compared to this bolt of lightning, the lightning that Zen had seen before somehow seemed incomplete. This was not a simple comparison in terms of power, but a comparison in terms of perfection. Although Zen could not see which layer of thunder law this lightning contained, he estimated that it was very likely to be the 10th layer. Zen's line of sight was shuttling back and forth through the chaotic world at an extremely high speed. In fact, he was unable to control his own perception, as if he was following the movements of the owner of this book. It was like watching a picture with real-time effects. Zen could see everything but only as a passive spectator, accepting the breathtaking scenes recorded in the book. A long while later, Zen finally exited the chaotic world of the book with a look of shock on his face. If what he guessed was right, then the chaos he had just seen was outside the universe itself. But what existence lay outside the universe? What did those bizarre scenes represent? Zen had not found the answers to those questions in this book. The owner of this book had traveled an unknown distance in the chaos, but beyond that chaos was chaos still. It was as if the chaos was endless.